On the night of the 24th of August 2001, a fully loaded Airbus A330 with 306 people on board ran out of fuel midway over the Atlantic. How could a state-of-the-art computerized airliner suffer such a catastrophic failure?
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now. Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute.
We have to ditch in the water.
I need you to put on your life jackets right now.
This film investigates what happened to Air Transat Flight 236.
This is it. It's over. You're just gonna die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast.
Everybody, I need you to brace. Oh my God!
August 23rd, 2001. Toronto International Airport is busy. Air Transat is a charter company that has grown rapidly to become one of the largest airlines in Canada. Midsummer brings fewer business travelers and a holiday atmosphere. Air Transat Flight 236 is bound for Lisbon. Most of the passengers are Canadians visiting Europe or Portuguese immigrants heading home. The plane, a twin-engined Airbus A330, is being flown by a young co-pilot, Dirk de Jager, and an experienced captain, Robert Piche.
Captain Robert Piche is somewhat out of the ordinary. Captain Piche, from the moment he gets his wing, he gets to learn how to fly in the north of the province of Quebec, where the conditions occasionally are very severe.
The flight deck of the A330 is ultra-modern. Banks of computers connected to over 100 onboard sensors constantly monitor the operation of the plane. This film reveals how serious problems can arise when the pilots begin to distrust the computers. Before departure, the computers give no indications of any problems with the Airbus.
236 Heavy, follow A320 Air Canada. Turn left on Romeo and hold short on 24 right.
Roger, follow A320 Air Canada, left on Romeo, and hold short of 24 right.
With the crew of 7, Flight 236 has 306 people on board.
No, we were married for 4 days, wasn't it?
4 days.
4 days.
4 days. So we had planned to go to Portugal for our honeymoon, and we had booked this flight on Air Transat. And rather quickly, because we hadn't really planned what we were going to do very carefully. So this was the last flight left.
Well, boarded on this flight to go on a 2.5-week vacation with a friend of mine. Obviously, I was very excited, spending 2.5 weeks on the coast of Portugal. A very excited feeling.
Transat 236 Heavy, cleared for takeoff.
240 at 8, cleared for takeoff, 24 right, Transat 236 Heavy.
At 20 minutes past 8, the Airbus A330, loaded with over 47 tons of fuel, leaves Toronto for Lisbon.
V1, rotate.
The weather forecast for the Atlantic crossing is good. Everything runs smoothly on the flight deck, apart from a small adjustment to the route. To avoid congestion, air traffic control directs the flight 60 miles south of its original route. It's a minor alteration, but will later play a crucial role. The passengers settle down for the long crossing.
The reason for our trip to Portugal was a family trip. We were going to a wedding. Otherwise, we would not have gone this year. So instead of just going for 4 days for a wedding, we decided to stay for 2 weeks and throw the wedding in as a kind of family perk and see everybody.
Everything appeared quite normal, and in fact, I had traveled on Air Transat previously and found it not to be very good, and was surprised by the quality of the flight, that it was on time, the plane was newer, and we thought generally it was much better than we had expected it would be.
We're getting to our next checkpoint.
Every 30 minutes across the Atlantic, the crew check their position and fuel consumption against their flight plan.
0.2 tons on the right, 11.2 tons on the left.
Despite the computerized systems, some procedures, like checking the fuel on board, still need to be done by hand.
5.2 tons.
By comparing the amount of fuel in the tanks with the amount the flight started with, the pilots can keep an eye on the fuel consumption.
Fuel check complete. Levels normal for the distance flown.
All right.
For the first 5 hours, everything is routine. The flight crew, Air Transat, and the accident investigators have all declined to be interviewed about what happened next. This film uses known facts about the flight, standard emergency procedures, and expert opinion to reconstruct what took place on Flight 236.
Look, we're getting a warning signal. Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2. What?
This warning is the first step in the crisis.
Oil pressure is within normal limits on number 1. And number 2 is slightly high.
The computer display reveals that the oil temperature is low in engine number 2, but the oil pressure is high. It is a very unusual reading. The pilots are puzzled.
I can't see anything here. I'll look in the FCOM.
Okay.
A low oil temperature indication is normally indicative of bad readings, bad sensor. Oil temperatures don't decrease normally, they increase. A low oil temperature would be of no concern. The high oil pressure is a very strange indication. It's very rare. In fact, I've never actually heard of one. It's only indicative of the contamination normally of the oil with fuel. That's not something that's explained in the manuals.
Call the company.
The crew contact Air Transat's maintenance group in Montreal.
Transat 236 to Mirabel Operations.
Mirabel Transat 236. Hi.
Hi, we have a little problem. We're getting the warning oil temp low and oil pressure high on the ECAM for engine number 2. There's nothing in the QRH nor the FCOM. Can you help us out?
I'm looking in the manual.
The ground crew have no immediate solution. The pilots must work it out for themselves.
They may have been given some advice on troubleshooting to see if that would help. But ultimately, the pilots are up there on their own. They can get advice from somebody 2,500 miles away, but they can't really fix their problems.
Suggest you keep monitoring your oil levels and see what happens. Advise us on
But because the oil readings are so unusual, the pilots believe they may indicate a computer error. The crew keep monitoring the oil levels. Air Transat 236 continues on track. Then, 20 minutes later, a new warning.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before. Follow all ECAM action. I have air traffic control.
In the Airbus A330, most of the fuel is in large tanks in the wings. The computer has now detected that the fuel level on the right is significantly lower than the left. The crew consult the Airbus flight manual, which recommends they transfer fuel through a special cross-feed valve. Fuel will then flow from one tank to the other. But before opening the cross-feed, the pilots must be sure that the imbalance is not caused by a more serious problem, such as a fuel leak.
Last fuel check was only 15 minutes ago and it was okay. No indication of a fuel leak. Keep going.
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
Once you begin a cross-feeding procedure to correct a fuel imbalance, restorative action should commence quite quickly. In other words, the situation would not continue to get worse. It would either stabilize immediately and then begin to correct itself.
But the situation is not correcting itself. Unknown to the pilots, there is a major fuel leak in the number 2 engine on the right-hand side of the plane. Flight 236 is in mid-Atlantic, nearly 300 kilometers from the nearest land. "39,000 feet over the Atlantic, nearly 300 kilometers from land, Air Transat Flight 236 is in trouble. Unknown to the pilots, the right engine is leaking fuel. The plane's computer system has thrown up a series of warnings, but the pilots believe these are computer errors.
Have you ever seen something like this before?
No. Never. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, even if there is a leak, it doesn't explain the alarms on the oil system.
And everything was okay at the last fuel check at 30 West. Oh. Bet you it's a computer problem.
The task of finding out if there is a fuel leak is made harder by the design of the Airbus systems.
The systems monitor hundreds and hundreds of sensors, and they can be affected by such mundane things as a little bit of frost or ice on a sensor can cause it to present bad data. So it's not something that would occur on every single flight, but it's something that we're quite used to dealing with.
There is no warning to show if the fuel level is falling faster than the engines are consuming it. So the pilots receive no immediate indication that there could be a fuel leak.
Fuel quantity isn't rising in the tanks for the right wing.
Check fuel quantity.
Looks very low. Hold on.
When co-pilot Diego carries out the fuel calculations, he discovers something is seriously wrong.
That's much less fuel than we should have. It looks like a fuel leak.
Check again.
Diego finds a disturbing difference.
According to all the gauges, all the tanks in the right wing are way below the level they should be according to the flight plan. And there's hardly anything in the other ones.
What about the trim tank?
There's nothing there either.
Yes?
Hello, first officer here.
Can you come to the cockpit, please?
Sure.
Although Captain Piche believes he is dealing with a computer problem, he nevertheless decides to ask for a visual check, just in case, to see if there could be a fuel leak.
Captain?
Hi. Can you and Karen take some flashlights and go to the windows if you can see anything trailing back from the wings? It'll look like a mist or a stream, and report back immediately.
Okay.
Dirt, I want you to do another complete fuel check, please.
I'm so sorry.
In daylight, the fuel pouring out of the back of the wing would have been clearly visible. But in the dead of night, even with a torch, the fuel leaking from the engine is impossible to see.
The crew evidently realized that the situation was not improving, and at that point they realized that their circumstances were becoming more serious. And I think that there were probably some discussions took place between the two pilots as to what their next course of action should be.
If the computer is correct, then with the amount of fuel remaining, the Airbus will no longer be able to make it to Lisbon. Captain Piche is forced to make a crucial decision.
We've got to divert. Get on to Oceanic Control. Where's the nearest airfield?
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. Can you advise nearest airfield? We have a possible fuel problem.
The nearest runway is over 300 kilometers away. But with the fuel remaining, Leger's military airbase on the tiny island of Terceira in the Azores should be within reach.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy. Proceed 230 flight level 390 direct. 350 miles to threshold. Are you declaring an emergency?
Stand by, Santa Maria Control.
Not yet. It must be the computer.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. No assistance required yet.
Flight 236 continues flying south for the next 25 minutes. Everything in the cabin seems normal. But in the cockpit, the fuel readings are getting worse.
Must be the computer.
I've checked. There's nothing in the trim or center tank. And the gauges show only 7.5.
According to the fuel gauges, the plane is using fuel much faster than normal. Whether they believe the gauges or not, the captain has no choice. He must warn air traffic control.
We have to declare a fuel emergency.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy, go ahead.
Transat 236 Heavy, declaring fuel emergency.
I really hope it's a computer bug. Because if we land in the Azores with half a plane full of fuel, they'll crucify us.
But at 6:13 a.m., less than an hour from the first fuel alarm, the right-hand engine runs out of fuel and cuts out.
We're losing engine number 2. I don't believe this. Okay, maximum thrust on number 1.
What's going on? What's
The
happening?
lights started flickering on and off, which I thought was kind of odd, strange.
On one engine, the Airbus will not fly at 39,000 feet. They must descend quickly.
Try to transfer fuel from center tank and the trim tank.
Transferring. Fuel quantities reaching 0.
This can't be. We're not gonna go completely dry on this airplane. All right. We can't stay at 39,000 feet with just one engine. We'll descend to 33,000 to control our speed.
236 Villages Tower. We have lost one engine. Engine flame out.
Roger, Transat 236. We can see you on primary radar. You are at 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
We are 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
Well, there's a whole lot of critical things go on. In addition to that, you turn on all the exterior lights so people can see you're in trouble. You have to broadcast your intentions on an emergency frequency so that other people know that you're unable to maintain your altitude. You may be descending through their altitude, so everybody else is now on the lookout for an airplane that's in distress.
For the next 10 minutes, the stricken Airbus continues on its one remaining engine. The pilots still believe that the computer may be partly faulty and that they can make it to Leger's with fuel to spare.
At the end, might be all right.
Fuel gauge is falling fast, though. It's nearly hitting 0.
But 13 minutes after the right-hand engine cut out, and with 130 kilometers still to go, the left engine begins to fail.
we're losing number one.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
One of the most sophisticated airliners of the modern era, carrying 306 passengers and crew, is now nothing more than a giant glider, drifting steadily down towards the ocean.
Excuse me, can somebody come? Hello?
You can literally hear a pin drop. The exterior, there was no sound in that plane, in that cabin at all.
A lot of people were praying and screaming for God.
My wife was a little hysterical. My best friend was in another world.
The plane was dead silent, except for the people who were very upset.
List of functions we've lost. We have no more stabilizer. Blue and yellow hydraulic. No ADR 2 and 3. No anti-skid. No reversers. Rudder trim. Radio HF 1 and 2.
With the loss of both engines, we have no electrical system. If the engines aren't running, the generators aren't running. So there's no power on the airplane. There is a small device, it's called a ram air turbine. It will deploy from underneath the fuselage near the wing fairing. And it's a small propeller that deploys out the bottom of the fuselage and it spins in the wind. And that small propeller will provide very limited electrical and hydraulic systems to run the aircraft. In other words, although it's a glider, at least it's a controllable glider.
Calculate how far we can go with our glide angle, will you?
Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute. We can hang on for 14 or 15 minutes.
What? I don't want to die on our honeymoon.
I was just trying to calm her down, like try and reassure her that everything would be okay.
It's a very big struggle to stay calm when you're considering your own death.
Without power, the plane loses 1,000 feet in height for every 5 kilometers it travels forward. They can reach the Azores, but if the pilots get their calculations wrong, they may face a forced landing on the water.
Not sure we can make it to Legis.
Air Transat Flight 236 is now drifting without fuel over the Atlantic. Although their initial calculations show that the plane should make it to Legis, Captain Piche must now follow standard emergency procedure for a passenger jet over water.
Prepare the cabin.
The cabin's slowly depressurizing.
We need to put our oxygen masks on.
The loss of engine power means the cabin soon depressurizes.
Everybody, please, I need your attention. We're preparing to ditch the plane. I need you to put on your life jackets right now.
Within probably, I'd say, 2 minutes, I saw flight attendants with life jackets in their hand running down the aisles. And obviously, that was a sign of fear. What was happening was the first question that popped in my mind.
We just need to tie this up like that.
You know, you don't really know what to think, but people did start to panic at that point when they were told to put on life jackets.
This isn't working. No, it's all right. Please keep her calm.
My best friend was talking to his father. His father died 3 years ago. But he's talking to him because he thought for sure he was going to be joining him. And I just kept the same reiteration. Oh, it's okay, one hand on one leg, one hand on the other, both their arms clenched to mine, kind of looking at my in-laws, blinking. You know, it's okay, it's nothing.
I kept thinking that if the plane did hit water, that we would survive. I was so convinced that we would survive no matter what happened to the plane that I was probably delusional.
fear just suddenly just kicked in from my toes straight up to my head. At that point, they started instructing us and giving us instructions of what to do in this procedure. Take off your shoes was one of them. Don't inflate your life jacket until we hit the water. Get into this position when we hit the water. It was a lot of, it wasn't like ifs or maybes. It was, this was gonna happen, this is the real deal.
Ditching a large passenger jet on the water presents severe hazards. If the Airbus A330 has to make a forced landing, the chances of survival are bleak.
In my personal opinion, I don't think these airplanes would make very good boats. Typically, an airplane with a low mounted tail like this, as it enters the water, one of the first things that's going to hit the water is the tail, and it's probably going to be ripped right off, and the fuselage is probably going to open right about there.
In 1996, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel off the coast of East Africa. Its last moments were caught on amateur video and reveal what happens when an airliner attempts a controlled landing on water. Of the 175 people on the Ethiopian Airways jet, only 50 survived.
The chances of it surviving a ditching and floating for very long are not very good.
If Air Transat Flight 236 has to carry out a similar maneuver, it faces an equally grave outcome. With over 100 kilometers before they reach the Azores, the pilots face a long and difficult maneuver. They need to keep the plane gliding for more than 50 minutes to reach the Azores.
There's very little time for any emotions at all. You're just so focused on the mission at hand. It's a life or death situation, of course, but you know, your intention is to get it there. You're not thinking about the alternatives, but you're fully focused on getting the airplane to its destination.
Transat 236 Heavy to Lajes Tower. Lajes Tower receiving, Transat 236 Heavy.
Do you have us
On radar, Transat 236. We have you on primary radar. Confirm you're at 80 miles out. Your heading is good.
Transat 236 Heavy Lajes Tower? We are trying to make the runway. Please
Describe runway, heading, and length. Lajes Tower, Transat 236 Heavy. Runway is 33 and 10,865 feet long. Airport dead ahead on your present heading. Please advise when you have it in sight.
Transat 236 Heavy, we cannot see the airport. We will tell you when we can.
As the minutes tick by, the long wait for those on board is agonizing.
That's it. This is it. It's over. They're just gonna die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
I had contemplated the idea that we would die, certainly. And kind of I think in that moment you can accept it more than you think you would accept it.
I never thought I was gonna die. I was in a little bit of a state of distress. I did my best not to show it, to try to keep the cool, calm, and collected, but there was certain times where I wasn't sure if we would make it.
The torture of the whole fact that you're gonna die, which I totally thought I was going to, is worse to me than dying. If I'm gonna die, just kill me now. Just get a gun and shoot me, or just let this plane go down and nosedive into the ocean and then just die instantly.
On the ground, emergency services prepare for the crash landing of a fully loaded airliner. With 20 kilometers to go, the crew now prepare for the most dangerous part of the operation, getting their plane on the runway in one piece.
6 Heavy to Lajes Tower. Do you have our distance from threshold now and weather, please?
Roger, Transat 236 Heavy. You are 8 miles out according to primary radar. Airspeed 280 knots according to our readings. Visibility unlimited. You should have the airport in sight. Negative, Lajes Tower. Until now, we cannot see the runway.
There is no room for error. Without power, the pilots have only one chance at landing. If they miss or overshoot the runway, the results could be catastrophic.
I got it. Just to the right. Minimum RAT speed is 140 knots. Maximum speed for gravity gear extension, 200 knots.
I'm not lowering the gear until the last minute, okay?
Okay.
The crew struggle to lose height and speed for landing.
Roger, Lajes. 6 nautical miles.
Let's open the slats. It'll slow us down a bit.
Slats out and locked.
As they approach the runway, their speed increases dangerously. Too fast and they could roll off the end of the runway.
Lower the gear.
Hold on. Speed is about 200. All right. I stabilize the speed. Can you give me a landing speed, please?
No engine, no flaps. Ideal approach speed is 170 knots. We're too fast.
Yes. But the runway is very long.
Captain Piche now performs a difficult series of swerving maneuvers to slow the plane down for landing.
The plane was almost on a 45-degree angle. I thought it was just gonna flip over and just nosedive straight down.
The plane was circling around the island to slow down. So then we saw land and then we saw water. And when I saw water again, it really struck me that, you know, our chance for survival had maybe was gone.
The runway is long. Yeah, sure, but at the end is a 400-foot cliff. If we don't stop in enough time, we're toast. We're dead.
The crew line up the giant Airbus for final approach.
Landing gear down and locked. 3 green. No flaps. Only the emergency brakes. No spoilers, no reverse thrust. 4,000 feet, 195 knots. "3,000 feet, 197 knots. "2,000 feet, 200 knots.
Alert the cabin.
Cabin crew, 1 minute to landing.
Hang on. Let's go.
Vertical speed at 3,000 feet per minute. We're going way too fast. And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast. 1,000 feet, 201 knots.
I'll try to get the nose up. We'll ride fast.
But even if the crew can get the Airbus on the runway, they face a further problem. Without engines, the normal procedures for braking are severely restricted. For Flight 236, the danger is far from over. The pilots must land the plane without power and somehow get it to stop.
Everybody, I need you to brace.
Airbus hits hard at high speed.
The tires have blown!
Captain Piche tries to hold the nose down. After bursting 8 tires, the plane finally stops in the middle of the runway.
What we say? We made it! We made it! We made it!
Come on, everybody, get out of the plane right now. Let's get it. Come on, come on.
Told you we'd make it.
I just wanted to get out of this airplane quickly. I jumped, I hit the ground hard. I don't think my rear end actually even touched the chute at all.
I didn't slide down the slide. I ran down it. And they're just, get out, get out, get out. So you're just running out of this aircraft.
What in God's name just happened? I fell down to the ground, literally, and I started crying.
I mean, once you're off the plane and you're evacuated, you want to know what happened.
Piche and de Jager had flown their Airbus without power further than any passenger jets in history. As news of their remarkable achievements spread around the world, they found themselves reluctant heroes.
You don't have time really to think about anything else than taking care of the safety of your passenger, you know. That's your main goal, and since we didn't have any engine, the other main goal was to make the landing safely. So at that time, I guess the experience came in, you know. With the help of my colleague, that's why we made a successful landing.
You train for the worst, but you never know how you'll deal with situations like this. And reflecting afterwards, I feel we dealt in the most professional and complete manner we could.
A feeling of being grateful to see all the passengers were okay.
You know, something like this happened, you never know what is going to happen really. I mean, you start not to believe it. I mean, makes no sense that a big jet with 2 engines has no more power with 300 people on board, you know.
But although the public story was a success, disturbing questions remained. Why had a highly sophisticated airliner run out of fuel? What exactly had happened to Flight 236? Away from the cameras, an accident investigation began immediately by the Portuguese, Canadian, and French transport authorities. Initial checks quickly confirmed that all the fuel tanks of the Airbus were indeed empty. But to lose more than 17 tons of fuel in such a short space of time meant they'd had a major leak. The question was, where? Engineers examined the fuel system, searching for faults in the tanks and the fuel lines. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for, just by the right engine.
In this particular case, you had a hydraulic tube that's relatively small by comparison to the larger fuel tube. And the hydraulic tube, due possibly to pulsations in the hydraulic system, were abrading against the larger tube. And eventually the larger tube had a leak in it, and the leak, or not the leak itself, but the hole eventually possibly led into a fracture of the tube, allowing this massive fuel flow outside of the engine.
The investigators began checking Air Transat maintenance records. They discovered that on the 17th of August, 5 days before the flight, Air Transat had removed the right-hand engine for maintenance and installed a replacement unit sent by Rolls-Royce. But as they analyzed the repair logs for the engine, they uncovered a shocking mistake. This was not a case of faulty design, but of faulty maintenance. Rolls-Royce had supplied the engine without a hydraulic pump assembly. To overcome this, Transat mechanics had used the parts from an older engine. But they didn't fit properly, and the pipes had been rubbing together for 5 days, until, midway over the Atlantic, one finally broke.
The engine was delivered minus these 2 tubes and a bracket. that the purpose of that bracket was to maintain adequate clearance. So if they took the bracket off the old engine and put it on the new engine, is that the pipes would be locked together so that they could possibly abrade. So the mechanics, now I can't fault them, but they were not given specific instructions to verify the 3 millimeter clearance.
As investigators questioned Air Transat mechanics, they found more disturbing evidence of malpractice. The chief mechanic testified that he had been concerned about the substitution of another hydraulic assembly. 5 days before the accident, he raised his concerns with his superior. He was told that it would cost too much to have the aircraft waiting for the missing parts and to go ahead with the substitution. The replacement parts only differed from the correct ones by a few millimeters, but it was a difference that almost cost 306 lives. A few days after the accident, Air Transat publicly accepted responsibility for the faulty maintenance.
We have to realize that there was a small mistake made in terms of changing the pump. We installed it, but then some pipes, so to speak, were needed to be connected to the pump, and there was a mismatch.
The immediate consequences for Air Transat in that event was that they got to pay a fine of $250,000, which was the highest ever in Canada, for an error that could have been prevented.
How someone that is supposed to be qualified in their job can put the wrong part onto an engine and risk 300 people's lives is beyond me.
This incident is a very strong reminder that regulation is important and safety is important, and lives will be lost in the absence of that. And they're real lives. It's not just, this imaginary figure in your head of 300 people. It's real people who suffer and continue to suffer as a result. If it hadn't been us suffering, it would have been our families.
This was by no means the end of the story. Investigators now turn their attention to the cockpit itself. What role had the crew played in the events of August the 24th? Could they have done more to avert the crisis? Key questions remained unanswered. Questions about what happened on the flight deck. The investigation into Air Transat Flight 236 discovered that basic maintenance errors had led to the fuel leak. Air Transat accepted responsibility and were heavily fined. But the focus now turned on the flight deck and the performance of the crew. What part did they play in the fuel loss?
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
When the crew opened the crossfeed valve to transfer fuel from the left wing tank to the right, they lost 17 tons of fuel in less than 30 minutes. Yet they failed to close the crossfeed valve and prevent further loss.
Mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
In the days after the incident, Captain Robert Piche and Dirk de Jager were called before the inquiry and asked in detail about their actions. More than 2 years later, these findings have still not been published. What follows are possible explanations for the course of events that night, based on known facts and expert opinion.
Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2.
The warnings of high oil pressure and low oil temperature from the engine on the right wing would not have led the pilots to suspect that there was already a major fuel leak.
The indications that were being presented with respect to the oil system would probably not give the crew any indications. They may have questioned what was causing the erroneous or strange indications, But there's nothing certainly in my mind or their training, I think, that would have triggered them to suspect that a fuel system might be involved.
Bet you it's a computer problem.
But although the pilots thought they had a computer error, the oil warnings were actually correct and were the first indication of a much more serious problem.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before.
When the fuel imbalance warning came up 20 minutes later, showing less fuel in the right wing than the left, it seemed unconnected with the oil alarms. This could have reinforced Captain Piche's idea that he was facing a series of computer errors.
Do not apply this procedure if a fuel leak is suspected.
Despite his doubts, Captain Piche was obliged to follow Airbus procedure to correct the imbalance. He opened the crossfeed valve.
Wing crossfeed. On.
But was following the checklist enough?
You just can't idly flip switches in response to commands from the computers and anticipate that all will be well at the end of it. Once the checklist is complete, we can sit there fat, dumb, and happy. That's not the case at all. You got to keep second guessing it. Is that right? Did we do the right checklist? Have we got the results that we need?
Once the pilots calculated the high rate of fuel loss, they should have suspected a major leak.
Transat 236 Heavy declaring fuel emergency.
By the time they had confirmed the leak, their options were severely limited.
They were flying blind, as it were. There was no checklist information provided to them. They assumed that once they had engaged in this procedure that the situation would resolve itself, and it wasn't. Now they had a choice. Do I close the crossfeed and see what happens, or do I leave the crossfeed open as the fuel imbalance checklist has dictated, and maybe the situation will correct itself? The crew wasn't really sure. It wasn't an eventuality. It wasn't a situation that they had been trained for, I'm sure. They were in new ground with really no guidance to help them. If they left the crossfeed open, or whether they closed the crossfeed, I would only be speculating as to what changes it might have resulted in the outcome in this event.
Captain Piche believed for a long time that he was facing a computer error. It was only when the engines finally stopped that he had to accept the fuel leak was genuine. The technological complexity of modern aircraft can help to make them safer and more reliable, but it can also lead to the problems that nearly brought catastrophe to Air Transat 236. Discrepancies in replacement parts led to a fuel leak. Distrust of computers led the crew to misread the situation. These errors combined to have huge implications. Only because air traffic control initially sent the plane 60 miles south to avoid congestion was Flight 236 close enough to the Azores when the crisis struck. Otherwise, it would have had to ditch in the ocean. The investigation remains unpublished. Airbus blamed the pilots for mishandling the fuel leak. Robert Piche and Dirk de Jager continued to fly with Air Transat. In August 2002, they received the highest honors of the Airline Pilots Association for the longest glide ever accomplished in a passenger airline. After the accident, Airbus modified its checklist in the event of fuel imbalance. From now on, the computer checks all the fuel levels on board against the flight plan. It now gives a clear warning if more fuel is being lost than the engines can consume. Rolls-Royce has reissued a service bulletin, alerting all its clients of the incompatibility of two almost similar parts. For the passengers trapped on Flight 236, the trauma has left them with mixed feelings.
All right, I stabilized the speed.
This accident wasn't caused by simply one omission by any one individual, as is typical of most aircraft accidents. There's a whole chain of events, a whole series of events that lead to the incident or to the accident, and this accident was no different.
whatever the circumstances are, the pressure that he was under is tremendous. He got that plane down safely, only blew out 8 of the 12 tires, and saved 300 people. He saved 300 people's lives.
Captain Piche saved our lives, and whether or not he made an error, or if there was a failure of a computer, it doesn't really matter because we're alive.
Do I think he's a hero? No. Do I think he's a hell of a pilot? Yes.
Thank God the islands of the Azores were there and basically saved our lives. But if that fuel pump broke 5 minutes beforehand, we would have ended up into the water, and I probably wouldn't be here to tell the story.
In heavy wind and blinding rain, the crew of a passenger jet struggles to land.
Put it down! Put it down!
A terrifying crash landing leads to a desperate fight to survive.
The only thing that matters to me now is to get my daughter Emily and protect her as we blow up.
But we just knew that there were so many passengers in that plane that had not gotten out.
Open the door! Open the door! Mayday, Mayday.
This is a true story based on air traffic control recordings, official reports, and interviews with those involved. Tuesday, August the 2nd, 2005. Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. 297 passengers are boarding Air France Flight 358, bound for Toronto.
Far aisle, left-hand side. Yes.
Philippe Lacaille is traveling with his wife and 2 of his 4 children.
Would you like the windows?
They're stuck at the back of the enormous jet, and they're not sitting together.
It just happened that we were separated from Emily. They had 3 seats together, so we were in the middle section, and Emily was actually sitting a couple of seats ahead of us on the right side, so close to the right wing of the plane.
For Eddie Ho, Flight 358 is the continuation of a trip that began in Johannesburg.
I'm an international student in Canada at Queen's University, and every summer I go back to South Africa.
Ho isn't traveling light.
I was carrying everything that I had, my books to my clothing to tuition money for the year, computer laptops.
This is also another leg in a long journey for Joanne Cordery Bundock, who's returning from a trip to Thailand.
I rerouted myself in the last 2 days before the flight from Bangkok through Paris to come directly to Toronto.
As the passengers continue to board, the flight crew gets settled into the Airbus A330. The captain is 57-year-old Alain Rosaille. He's been with Air France for more than 20 years. His co-pilot is 43-year-old Frédéric No.
Do you want to start, or should I?
Why don't you fly first, and then I'll take over for landing in Toronto. I check the weather.
On this flight, the 2 men decide that Captain Rosaille will handle the takeoff in Paris, and co-pilot No will land in Toronto.
Destination, Toronto Pearson.
Check. Crews often split the duties so that co-pilots can get more experience. Rezai and No are joined by one other person in the cockpit.
I think you've been expecting me. I'm Miles Trochassé.
Miles Trochassé is the son of an Air France employee. He's allowed to ride in the cockpit's jump seat for free.
I just want to let you know I've done this before. I promise I'll be quiet.
This Air France plane is one of the safest in the world. Since the A340s first went into service in 1993, they've had an excellent safety record.
Air France 358. Air France 358, runway 27 left. Cleared for takeoff.
Cleared for takeoff. Air France 358. Have a good afternoon, gentlemen.
Just a few minutes before 2 in the afternoon, Flight 358 powers into the sky above Paris. Toronto may be several thousand kilometers away, but the friends and family of those on board Flight 358 are already making plans to meet the plane when it arrives.
Hello? Audrey, I won't forget. I'll make sure to pick up Mom and Dad. No, I won't forget the 2 brats either. I'll get them all.
Well, we usually make arrangements before we go to France to be picked up. It's easier because we have lots of luggage, you know, and we bring back stuff from France. So it just happened that Julian, our son, was going to spend the summer in Toronto and was available to pick us up.
Sis, I'll give you a call as soon as I get in. Don't worry. I got it covered. Okay? All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Center, we have a humidex advisory and extreme heat alert for Toronto, as well as a thunderstorm warning in effect for Toronto.
A regular flight from Paris to Toronto takes about 8 hours. As Air France 358 closes in on Canada, there's little to separate this trip from any other.
I found that their service was amazing. The food was great. They had very good flight attendants.
There were a lot of exchange students from France, you know, like teenagers, you know, coming to Canada for their first time, usually their first flight, and they were very rowdy.
There was a beautiful day on the flight over, and the sun was shining, and it was just blue skies and white clouds and just a lovely day.
The autopilot does most of the work for Captain Alain Rezai and his co-pilot Frédéric No. Just as the 2 men had planned, No is now in control of the plane.
We have a new weather report.
The 2 men get regular updates on the weather conditions in Toronto.
Overcast and rainy with a chance of thunderstorms. Temperature in the low 20s.
At Toronto's International Airport, the thunderstorms are already rolling through. Rain, wind, and lightning are hammering the runways. The lightning has already forced airport authorities to declare a red alert. It means that the chance of being struck by lightning is so great that ground crews are not allowed to work on the planes. Just as Flight 358 closes in on Toronto, it's put into a holding pattern. The weather isn't getting any better.
There's going to be a little delay.
Air France 358, so roger on delay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm sorry to inform you that there'll be a short delay. There's some weather conditions above Toronto, and we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to clear up.
I was very surprised when I heard the captain's announcement that we were going to be delayed in landing for about 25 or 30 minutes because of thunderstorms over Toronto.
While they're not in the storm yet, the crew enters their holding pattern northeast of Toronto. Their alternate airport is almost 300 kilometers away in Ottawa. At the moment, the plane has a little over 7,500 kilograms of fuel in its tanks, more than enough to get them there.
Typically, a pilot will think about the economic impact of diverting to an alternate airport. While that is not a primary decision maker, it is an alternate decision maker as far as if they have to divert, how are the folks going to be transported from that alternate airport back to the destination airport that the airplane was originally going to.
Flying almost 300 passengers to Ottawa would be a logistical nightmare. But the crew can't circle for too long with the fuel they have. If the delay continues, they'll have no choice but to divert.
Air France, Toronto arrival. Your hold is now canceled. You are cleared for a Wasi 2 arrival. Maintain 5,000 feet.
Air France 358, roger on cancellation of hold. Cleared for Wasi 2 arrival and maintain...
Today, the delay isn't long at all. Although the storm continues to thunder down near the airport, the crew is put into their landing sequence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Just wanted to let you know we're beginning our descent into Toronto at this time. We should be on the ground at about 4 p.m. local time.
Usually when they say 45 minutes, it's to be nice. Usually it's like an hour and a half. This time it was like 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, they said, okay, well, now we're going to go down, prepare, for the landing.
With co-pilot Frédéric No at the controls, the plane begins its descent into the storm.
Air France 358, reducing speed to 190.
No isn't prepared for what he's about to face. The storm has a savage surprise in store for everyone on board Flight 358. A brutal summer storm is battering Toronto. Winds and lightning are hammering the airport, making it tense for incoming planes. After a short hold, Air France Flight 358, with 297 passengers aboard, begins descending into the storm.
Flaps 2.
Flaps 2.
F-speed.
Gear down.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
It'll be fine. Don't worry. It immediately turned into very dark skies and dark clouds and a little bit bumpy and choppy, and the weather outside was definitely within a thunderstorm. But really and truly, to me, it was just a typical stormy landing. Nothing out of the ordinary.
In the main cabin, though, not everyone is so sure.
The plane was getting very bumpy. There was a lot of turbulence. We were surrounded basically by heavier weather, and this was completely not expected. I didn't expect that.
Air France 358, slow your final approach speed.
Air France 358.
Co-pilot Frédéric No has the plane in position. He's moments from landing.
Air France 358, roger.
Flaps to full.
Flaps full.
It was going darker and darker. We were like in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of lightnings. Like every second we had lightnings all around us. So people were getting nervous, quite nervous. I was getting nervous.
Ahead of the Air France Airbus, 2 other planes have just touched down on the same runway that Flight 358 is heading for.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised the preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots, gust to 20. France 358, thank you.
The crew is being sent to runway 24 left, which will allow them to land into the wind. It also happens to be the closest runway to the city's biggest freeway, which is gearing up to handle the evening rush hour traffic. Facing unpredictable winds and a wet runway, the crew prepare for the landing.
Select auto brakes to medium.
Medium is set.
The final approach for landing was hellish. Lightnings were all over. Turbulences were enormous. You could feel the pilot fight with the plane to keep the plane in line with the runway to land, and they had a heck of a time to keep it lined up. I know my son next to me was getting very nervous, and I was nervous to see my daughter actually far from us.
I cinched up my seatbelt tighter than it was, expecting a very hard landing, and the pilot was going to stick it on the runway, or we were maybe going to do a touch and go, and he was going to give it power and go around, because I knew that it was not going to be just a normal landing.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
At 2 minutes after 4 o'clock, Air France Flight 358 roars over the beginning of the runway.
Put it down!
This landing was more intense and harder than any time I've ever landed in another aircraft.
It's a very difficult landing, and everyone started clapping, and even the lady who sitting next to me, I remember very clearly, she said, you know, wow, that was an amazing landing. And as soon as she finished that sentence, then all hell broke loose.
We started the plane started violently going up and down, and it felt like we were going 100 miles an hour down a road filled with potholes that were about 3 feet deep.
Immediately you could see this orange aura, and for me it's a picture I will never forget. My daughter was sitting ahead of us on the right side of the plane, and at that time she turned her head towards us, you know, with very wide eyes, you know, looking at us, and her face was surrounded by this enormous aura, orange aura of fire.
Then, moments after touching down, still traveling at 146 kilometers per hour, Flight 358 runs out of room.
At that point that I believed that we were all going to die. It was obvious that look, no one can survive this kind of thing.
I thought this was it.
The next thing that I can remember is that an announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, everything's okay. We've stopped now. Well, no kidding. Of course we've stopped now. But I could tell that everything was not okay because I could immediately smell jet fuel.
As the smell of jet fuel fills the cabin,
Fire! Go!
Panic quickly spreads.
Everybody was expecting the plane to blow up. It was obvious.
Smoke and flames are spreading quickly. Now it's a desperate struggle to escape.
You hear shouting from the back that there was a fire, and then people started really get panicked.
If they don't get out, they have just seconds to live.
We know that about 2 minutes into a fire, in many cases, the environment becomes untenable. So 90 seconds is a good rule that we use in trying to get people out to make sure that they have as much time and safety as possible.
297 passengers are desperate to leave the plane.
The only thing that matters to me now is to get my daughter Emily, who's sitting like 2 seats ahead of me, get her onto me, and protect her as we blow up.
Am I going to try to get my luggage, my laptop? And then I thought to myself, what if I would die trying to get my laptop? I just said, okay, I've got to get out. I've got to get out.
Flight 358 has 8 possible emergency exits, but seconds after the crash, most of them aren't opened.
People were crawling over the seats. They were pushing each other. They were just basically all for yourself.
Hey, stay calm, please. Please stay calm. Be all right. Open the door! Open the door!
And I could see the air attendant there struggling with the fact that should I or should I not open this door, because the fire was raging just in front of it.
If the fuel tanks rupture and we have a lot of fuel that gets out either onto the ground, well then there's enough heat and fire there that would cause the airplane skin to melt in a couple minutes.
At the front of the plane, thick smoke is pouring in through one of the open doors. Joanne Cordery-Bundock races to the other side of the plane.
The gentleman in front of me had his bag with him, and he was kind of fumbling around with that and trying to take that down the slide. He was a rather large man, and the slide did not deploy the entire way, so I kind of bailed off the side above him and hit the ground.
Eddie Ho has found an exit too, but there's no slide.
And people pushing me forward. I couldn't even control myself. And I was like, I don't want to jump as well because, it was 5 meters down at least.
Is he okay? Is he okay?
In the cockpit, Captain Rosai has been badly injured when his seat was ripped off the floor by the force of the crash. As precious seconds tick by, the flight attendant near the Lacailles manages to open the exit door. Even though passengers are confronted with the flames and smoke of the burning engine, they jump out of the plane.
So push them down, my wife went down, I went down. We just ran up as fast as we could through torn metal and thorns and through whatever was left of the ground where the plane was.
Once the fire gets inside the airplane, all of the furnishings are much like the furnishings in your house, and there are foams and materials that, when they catch on fire, produce toxic gases, and that's really the most important lethal aspect of the fire.
Basically, you just had to jump. So what I did was, I prayed quickly and I closed my eyes and jumped.
Emergency workers are able to reach the burning jet just 52 seconds after it crashes. But with the threat of an explosion, it's dangerous to get too close.
It was very difficult to see anything due to the rain that was coming down. There was a lot of smoke engulfing the plane, some fire that was still ongoing, as well as you could see that some of the parts of the plane had broken off, some of the wheels that were at the side of the roadway, as well as portions of the plane's wings that had broken off.
Philippe Lacaille and his family struggle up the hill the plane has just plowed down.
You know, and at that point, the plane blew up. Once, twice, 3 times. So you could feel and hear this enormous explosion actually taking place. On the first one, I looked at the first one because I just couldn't believe my eyes. You know, I could see, I think, pieces of luggage, things flying up in the air. You know. And of course, at that time, I figured, oh my God, you know, that could have been us, you know.
We had a perfect view of the airplane and see this black smoke coming out the side of the airplane and the yellow and the orange and the red flames shooting out. We were fine, but we just knew that there were so many passengers in that plane that had not gotten out.
August the 2nd, 2005. Air France Flight 358 has crashed off its runway in Toronto. Flames are tearing at the fuselage. Smoke is pouring from the ruined jet. Dazed passengers are stumbling from the plane.
Passengers that were coming up, again, were very rain-soaked and muddy from coming up the hill. There were several individuals that once they got up there were crying and a bit emotional, as well as looking around for other passengers or family or friends that may have been with them at the time.
About 35 minutes ago, a plane ran off the runway at Toronto's Pearson Airport.
Footage of the crash quickly appears on local TV stations. Philippe Lacaille's daughter Audrey is one of the many people shocked by the pictures.
She turned on her TV, and here we go. There was the Air France crash right here, live in front of her, you know, burning, exploding right in front of her eyes.
250 people on board. We have not had any reason to make a statement yet as to whether anybody has survived or escaped.
Philippe Lacaille's son Julien is waiting for his father at the airport. He has no idea what's just happened to the Air France flight.
What? What do you mean, where am I? I'm at the airport waiting for Mom and Dad, like... You... What?
So Joey didn't know anything, and he was there at the airport. And she says, well, you know what? I think you're gonna have to wait a long time because the airplane just crashed.
One of the busiest highways in North America borders the airport. Just before rush hour, it's packed with thousands of vehicles. Drivers slow down, captivated by the terrifying sight of the burning plane. Some of the passengers who've escaped the plane stumble, dazed and shaken, right onto the edge of the highway. Passing motorists stop to take them to the airport.
At this point, there was only about 25 or 30 people with me in the airport. And here, you're also beginning to think, is this all there is?
As people are brought in, airport employees struggle to account for all the passengers and crew.
They were totally disorganized. There's no announcements being made. There's nothing of any kind of organization, and you're in this little crowded area with all the irate passengers waiting to be processed. Some people even said, you know, the first disaster was the plane crash, and the second disaster is exactly how it was handled afterwards.
Relatives wait desperately for any news. Julien Lacaille is just one of many who fears the worst.
for at least an hour and a half, he thought we were dead. That's a shame because, of course, we panicked, we were scared to death, but the families that were waiting for the passengers, they were even more scared because it lasted much longer. They really believed deep down that their family members were dead.
Finally, hours after the crash, passengers who have waiting family members are reunited.
Julian! Julian! Oh, you okay? Oh my God! We're okay. How did you...
We finally met up with Julian. It was 11 o'clock at night. It was, you know, God, we're so lucky. We're so lucky. We're alive, you know. It's hard to explain, but it's like you're giving a second chance, you know. Here's my son, you know. Maybe I didn't tell him I loved him, you know, when I left for France. Now it's time to say it right away. It was a very nice moment. A very, very deep moment.
It's just one of dozens of reunions. It takes hours to confirm, but by early evening, Air France and the local airport authorities can make the incredible announcement. Remarkably, every single passenger and all the members of the crew of Flight 358 have managed to escape the burning wreckage of their plane. The next day, smoke and charred wreckage are all that remain of Air France Flight 358. The Airbus A330 is a sophisticated, highly engineered plane with a glowing safety record. What had gone so terribly wrong? Canada's Transportation Safety Board quickly begins investigating the accident.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
Rain and lightning had been battling the airport all afternoon. Was it simply bad weather that caused this crash?
Put it down! Put it down!
Neither the pilot nor the co-pilot have spoken publicly about the crash.
We have to evacuate now!
Citing lawsuits that were filed soon after, Air France has kept all of its employees who were on the plane from speaking to the media.
Is he okay? I don't know. Is he okay? I don't know.
But former Air France trainer Hervé Labarthe has spoken to Captain Rosaille.
We spoke, let me think, for half an hour. He told me that this is the crucial point, that he has control. More specifically, informed control that he had reached the point where he would have to consider diverting. What he told me is that control informed him that they would soon open the runway. There was, of course, a lot of lightning, rain and turbulence can have a devastating effect. Instruments become more difficult to read, the aircraft is harder to handle.
Investigators discover that as the crew struggled for control in the cockpit, on the ground, delicate instruments used to measure the wind at the runway were destroyed by lightning. With the ground equipment destroyed, they were relying on their onboard systems for information about wind conditions.
The onboard equipment only gives them the actual wind direction and speed on the nose of the aircraft at that exact time. It does not predict ahead of the aircraft. So the pilots really have no way of knowing what lies ahead of them.
But two planes had touched down just minutes before the Air France flight on the same runway. The crews of those planes did their best to inform air traffic control of the tricky conditions.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots.
20-knot winds are strong, but are well within the allowable range for landing an A340. But when investigators study radar images of the airport, they discover quite a different story. As Flight 358 landed, a sharp line of rain moved across the runway from north to south. It was driven by a sudden gust of wind of up to 33 knots. The crew of the Air France jet had to deal with conditions that were much worse than they were expecting.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
33 knots is the demonstrated maximum crosswind for an A340, and that would be on a dry runway. So when you say 33 knots at 90 degrees, you're encroaching on the limits of the aircraft.
Closely studying the airport, investigators uncover another piece of the puzzle. Maintenance issues and the storm itself were forcing air traffic controllers to use runway 24 left for landings. It's the shortest runway at the airport, almost 650 meters shorter than some of the others. Blinded by rain, driven by unexpected winds, and landing on the shortest runway at the airport, Flight 358 was in a dangerous position.
Over the previous 4 hours, they had been made aware of the terrible storms and red alerts. And that was for me my biggest concern. Were they perhaps overtired? Were they lax, victims of routine? In any case, it's obvious that they hadn't gauged the extent of the danger.
It's evident that the flight crew didn't perceive the information that they were getting from these various sources as being threatening. Therefore, they attempted to make a landing.
But even in bad conditions, even on a short runway, the crew had 3,000 meters in which to land their plane. It should have been enough. To find out why it wasn't, investigators turned to the past. In 1999, an eerily similar accident took place in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Damn, we're off course. I can't see it. Way off.
Struggling with unpredictable weather, the crew of an American Airlines jet landed their plane, only to have it skid off the runway. 11 people were killed. Greg Feith helped investigate that crash.
One of the first things that I thought about was déjà vu. Having the first bits of information about the Air France accident, it reminded me so much of the American Airlines accident.
In the Little Rock crash, Feith discovered that the crew had made a critical mistake, which contributed significantly to the accident.
They hadn't followed all of the checklist procedures and they didn't have the ground spoilers armed, which basically degrades the efficiency of lift on the wing and settles the airplane heavily on the main wheels so that braking action is more effective.
Spoilers are only one of several ways pilots of passenger jets stop their massive planes. Reverse thrusters are used to redirect the engine power forward as the plane lands, and sophisticated brakes help slow the jets down. To rule out any mechanical fault, all 3 systems are examined by investigators of the Air France crash. One of the brakes on Flight 358 was destroyed in the fire, but the 7 other sets of brakes are all tested after the accident. All of them are working properly.
Flaps 2. Flaps 2. F-speed.
Investigators in Toronto also discover that, unlike in the Little Rock crash, this time the spoilers had deployed properly.
Landing gear down, spoilers armed, 4 green.
And when the engines are examined, the reverse thrusters are deployed. No obvious mechanical fault can be found. As the investigation continues, a French newspaper prints a bombshell. Le Figaro publishes a story claiming that the thrust reversers, which use the jet's engines to slow it down, were not turned on until the plane had been on the runway for more than 12 seconds.
As for Captain Rosay, he confirmed the newspaper report. His explanation was that his co-pilot had tense-stopped and was having difficulty controlling the lateral movement of the plane. No doubt because of the strong crosswinds and because the runway was so slippery, his hand was clamped tightly on the throttle release lever, which prevented the captain from reaching it himself. So the reverse thrusters could not be activated.
Shortly after the newspaper story appears, investigators publish their initial report. It confirms Le Figaro's version of events. Canada's Transportation Safety Board reveals that while the thrusters were found in the on position at the crash site, they had not been deployed as soon as the plane landed. In fact, it took 17 seconds before they reached maximum power.
The delay was a question raised in the report, and I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to why there was such a delay or what was the cause of it. I just know that pilots, as a rule, want to get those reversers in as quickly as possible for maximum stopping.
The investigators reveal other confusing facts about the last few seconds of Flight 358. When it came over the start of the runway, it was twice as high as it should have been. And when it did land, it was nearly halfway down the runway.
Put it down! Put it down!
In these stormy conditions, the crew didn't have enough time to stop.
Once they found that the airplane had floated down the runway, the pilot has to make the decision whether we stay on the ground and try to salvage this bad situation, or we abort the landing, power up, pull up, and go around, get our stuff together, and then come back for a second landing.
Air France 358.
But decisions in a cockpit are joint decisions. The captain and the first officer work together.
If the captain sees that landing will be difficult, he must open throttle and go through abort landing procedures. That's his duty. And of course, the co-pilot is also allowed to be the first to act. But the captain's duty is to avoid at all costs a lengthy touchdown. That is clear.
By the time the plane touched down, it had only 1,500 meters to stop. And when it did land, critical seconds were lost when the reverse thrusters weren't engaged.
Would it have made a difference to immediately activate the reverse thrusters? Of course it would. Since reverse function reaches its peak efficiency at high speed, that is the exact moment of touchdown, that's what reverse is there for. It's all a matter of aerodynamic braking. The other problem is that the wheels touched ground in the middle of the runway, and reverse or no reverse, at that point it was already too late, as was pointed out by the head of the inquiry. That being said, if the reverse thrusters had been activated immediately, the plane would have come to a stop more quickly.
In heavy storms, the margin for error is razor thin. On this rain-filled afternoon, sudden wind, a long landing, and a short runway sealed the fate of everyone on board Flight 358. What concerns some in the aviation industry isn't this particular flight, but the reality that overruns are far too common. They happen all around the world. And safety procedures that could stop them are not in place. In August 2005, Air France Flight 358 crashed off the end of a runway in Toronto. It was a horrifying incident, yet amazingly everyone survived. But Flight 358 wasn't the only jet to go off the end of a runway in 2005. Worldwide, there were 37 other runway overruns. And the causes of all these accidents were remarkably similar.
There are a number of causal factors that occur again and again in runway overrun accidents. The weather conditions, the state of the runway surface. It can be wet, it can be icy, it can have snow on it. Speed in excess of a normal approach speed for the aircraft that does not then bleed off as the aircraft attempts to land. And these factors occur again and again in runway overrun accidents.
Unlike the crash at Toronto, some overruns are deadly. This Southwest Airlines flight in Chicago slid off its runway several months after the Air France crash. A small child was killed in a car that was driving on the nearby highway.
Many older airports, in particular in big cities which have expanded out towards the airport in the course of their growth, are constrained in the area that they can use for overruns.
You have to consider what happens when the runway is contaminated? Snow, ice, standing water. That will degrade the stopping performance of the airplane. Add to that a tailwind component, which was existent at the time that Air France landed. That, in combination with the contaminated runway, can jeopardize the landing performance and in fact increase it probably by 50%.
The International Civil Aviation Organization recommends that every airport have a 300-meter safety zone at the end of runways that handle international flights. Canadian standards are a little less strict. They call for a 60-meter overrun area and recommend another 90 meters on top of that. Runway 24 left meets the low end of those recommendations.
There was another runway overrun accident to the runway in Toronto, which was very closely aligned with the runway that is there at the moment, in 1978, when a DC-9, an Air Canada DC-9, rejected a takeoff and ran into the ravine.
Well, the plane started to brake, and then there was just nothing, and then we dropped over the edge. There was about a 50-foot drop, I guess, at the end of the runway. We just went over the top, and then there was a heck of a bang, and people and seats all over the place.
2 people died in the 1978 accident. A coroner's inquest after the crash recommended that the gully be filled in, but it never was.
It's a steep ravine. It has about a 50-foot drop-off, and when you take a large, complicated and fragile piece of machinery, like a commercial aircraft, and you drop it 50 feet, then it tends to break.
There is a possible solution to runway overruns, but it's not being used in Toronto or many other international airports. It's called EMAS, or Engineered Material Arresting Systems.
It's a form of artificial stone or artificial gravel, which has a certain depth. And anybody who's ridden a bicycle into a gravel pit knows that a bicycle stops very quickly, and it can be almost impossible to pedal it out. And the same thing happens to airplanes.
Several airports in the US use the system, but most international airports do not.
It's very much more effective than friction braking, and it's certainly incomparably more effective than thrust reverse and spoilers. And any one of these systems, when properly engineered, can stop a large airplane, no matter what the runway surface conditions, in a very short distance.
We have to evacuate now!
But one vital air safety guideline was met when Flight 358 crashed. In spite of the smoke and the spreading fire, the crew of the crippled plane made sure that all the passengers escaped in just 90 seconds.
It's just a miracle that all of those people were able to evacuate the airplane as quickly as they did before the airplane was consumed.
The Air France flight was particularly noteworthy in that everybody got out, essentially unscathed. I know there were some injuries, but everyone got out. So I think it was noteworthy, and it was very good evacuation from that perspective.
Captain Alain Rosaille may never fly for Air France again. His injuries required extensive physical therapy after the crash. At the time, he was less than 3 years from retirement.
Every morning, Captain Rosaille relives the experience, coming face to face with the flames, the noise, the crash. And it made him sad to end his career on that note, having destroyed his plane. That's the worst possible fate for a pilot, the worst outcome.
The co-pilot, Frédéric No, is suspended for 3 months after the accident. By early the next year, he's back on duty with Air France. There are reports that after he helped Captain Rosaille out of the cockpit, he was the last person off the plane. The passengers deal with the crash in their own ways.
Well, I went through nightmares almost every single night, flashbacks during the day. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I questioned myself, why am I here? It's frightening, to be in such a state. And it has taught me to be strong.
We really need to take seriously those safety commands and evacuation information, because you never know. was a perfect flight. There's not any indications that anything can go wrong, and it's right at the very last second that everything happens. So thank goodness I'm here to be able to talk about it now.
Open the door! Open the door!
There's a lot of negative in the accident, and there's a lot of positive. The negative is, oh my God, you know, I'm gonna die. Oh my God, it's horrible. Oh, I have these nightmares, and you know, yes, I'm traumatized, and oh, my kids are traumatized. However, you have the positives, and the positives are, gee, I'm alive. You know, I have been given a second chance. I have been given a second life, and all of us, my wife and my children and myself, we all experience the same positive effects of the crash, which is we have to give back. We have to do something for others. We have to extend our heart out, our compassion to people who need it. It's almost therapeutic for us, you know. The more you do for others, the better you're gonna feel. So for me, I figured, you know, if I can extend my heart out to others, maybe it's gonna help me as well.
.639 pieces of wreckage are recovered from the scene. 639 pieces that only deepen the mystery of a deadly plane crash.
All right, a little bit more to the right. There.
But when investigators bring up the 640th piece of China Airlines Flight 611, they get their answer.
There was definitely a eureka moment on the dock.
It would be scrutinized more closely than any other piece of debris. On this single piece of wreckage, investigators would find the one clue that would tell them why a modern jetliner with 225 people on board shattered in mid-air.
Feet. Speed is low, sir. Watch it. Did you feel that?
Target control, descend and maintain. Echo Foxtrot, 126.
May the 25th, 2002.
Gears up.
A China Airlines 747 lifts off from Taiwan's capital, Taipei.
Taipei approach, Dynasty 611, airborne passing 1,600.
Dynasty 611, Taipei approach radar, contact climb, and maintain flight level 260.
260, Dynasty 611. Autopilot B, engage.
China Airlines is Taiwan's national airline. There are 225 people on board Flight 611. Today's flight is a short one, 1 hour and 40 minutes across the Taiwan Strait to Hong Kong. This route is one of the most widely traveled on the planet. It makes so much money, it's called the Golden Route.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fasten seatbelt sign has been turned off. For your safety, we do recommend that you keep your seatbelt fastened at all times while seated.
Minutes after taking off, Flight 611 climbs steadily above the Taiwan Strait. The plane's autopilot controls the ascent. And then, 20 minutes after taking off, at an altitude of almost 35,000 feet, at Taipei Area Control, the flight vanishes from radar.
Dynasty 611, Taipei. Dynasty 611, Taipei. I've got a plane off radar. China Airlines 611. Its last known return was east 119.67, north 23.98.
Taiwanese authorities quickly launch one of the largest rescue missions in that country's aviation history.
本时段备勤同仁，本时段备勤同仁，请立即至值班室集合。科研麻，你帮我。海顺动幺，海顺动幺，呼叫远方动幺，听到请回答。
我是同时下达。
I gave a clear order that the priority would be searching for whoever was still alive, then bodies, and then, only then, wreckage.
务必全力以赴。
More than 1,000 people take part. Fishing boats, the Coast Guard, and Taiwan's military race out to sea. Flight 611 was 55 kilometers from the Taiwanese shore, just north of the Penghu Islands, when it disappeared. Rescuers find debris floating in the Taiwan Strait.
First thing we saw was a great amount of wreckage, including landing gear wheels, napkins, knives, and forks.
Wreckage from the plane is spread far and wide. Some items are found on land more than 100 kilometers away in central Taiwan. As the rescue effort continues, Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council begins its investigation into the crash of the 22-year-old plane.
747-200, delivered August 2nd, 1979.
Kay Young is the managing director of the ASC. He'll be leading the investigation.
We're setting up a command post in Penghu Island. Let's go.
China Airlines have had very, very poor safety record. As a matter of fact, it was considered one of the worst in the world. Typically, it had like one major accident every 4 years. This particular investigation was by far the most difficult one. And one of the reasons why was it's in the ocean floor.
The search for survivors goes on around the clock. There were 225 people on the airplane. Nobody is found alive. The bodies are taken to the Penghu Islands to be identified and examined. Since the accident involved an American-made plane, the NTSB joins the investigation. A team of investigators is dispatched to Taiwan. They'll be led by John DeLisi in Washington.
We have a very good working relationship with the ASC, the Aviation Safety Council of Taiwan, so we knew that they would ask for and welcome our assistance in the investigation.
Wreckage that's found floating is also brought to the Penghu Islands. Investigators need to know how one of the world's most successful planes, on one of the world's most traveled routes, simply fell out of the sky.
Well, the Boeing 747 is the world's most popular jumbo jet, and it's flown millions of people, probably billions of miles. So we were very concerned.
Good morning. I'm anxious to see what you have.
Sophisticated ground-based radar tracked Flight 611 throughout its short journey. It should provide investigators with a much clearer picture of the flight than the radar at air traffic control. Kay Young gets the first major clue in this case. The radar tracked the plane as it climbed on course to 35,000 feet. Then suddenly, Flight 611's signal split apart.
The breakup is quite graphic.
Right when the event happened, it appeared as if there were 3 or 4 sizable pieces of wreckage that were getting radar returns that then began to drift and scatter as they fell to the earth. So that told us that the airplane broke up in flight.
Investigators now must turn their attention to finding out what caused that breakup.
There's all kind of theories about, what seems to be happening of that particular aircraft.
We knew that something massive had happened suddenly, without warning.
It doesn't take long for the media to consider a sinister possibility. That Flight 611 was shot down. China and Taiwan have a combative relationship. China has fired missiles towards Taiwan in the past. There's suspicion in the media that China shot down Flight 611.
There were a lot of theories about, it was shooting down by enemy fire.
Only 8 months earlier, a Siberia Airlines flight with 78 people on board was shot down over the Black Sea. It was accidentally hit by a missile fired from Ukraine during a training exercise. On the day of the China Airlines crash, China was conducting military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. But officials there insist no missile was launched towards Flight 611. None of the wreckage recovered so far has any of the telltale signs of being hit. And there's no evidence on radar that there was ever a missile heading for Flight 611.
Once the evidence began to come in, it very quickly ruled out a missile, much the same way that it ruled out it being a mid-air collision. There were no other objects in the air near the airplane.
Few things would cause a plane to break up in mid-air. One of the big ones is a bomb. Medical examiners check the bodies that have been recovered for burn marks and shrapnel. They find none. The plane's metal skin would be torn and curled in a very particular way if there had been a bomb on board. Investigators find no such damage on any of the pieces. But to rule out a bomb, they'll have to find more wreckage.
I think that'll be it for floating wreckage.
The team from the NTSB arrives in Taiwan.
Morning, I'm Clint Crookshanks from the NTSB. Hello.
Good to see you, gentlemen. I'm afraid we still don't have much.
Clint Crookshanks is a structural engineer who knows the 747 intimately.
I didn't have any preconceived notions. This was my first major accident working for the NTSB.
We are not getting much from the floating debris. In-flight breakup. That's all we know.
Taiwan's Civil Aeronautics Authority doesn't take any chances. They ground all of China Airlines 747-200 series planes until they can be inspected for mechanical flaws. This puts added pressure on investigators to find out what happened.
Thank you for bringing these.
To the NTSB, this accident seems to have a lot in common with one of the world's most studied plane crashes. That of TWA Flight 800, 6 years earlier. Like the China Airlines flight, it broke into pieces while still climbing. That plane crashed into the Atlantic shortly after taking off from New York.
TWA Flight 800 was the biggest investigation the NTSB has ever done. Lasted about 4 years.
The painstaking investigation uncovered a design flaw with the 747. Wiring near one of the plane's fuel tanks could spark and ignite the fuel in the tank. Investigators conclude that's what likely caused the crash. Investigators are struck by similarities between the two flights. Both were 747s. Both disintegrated without warning while still climbing. Both flights took off in very hot weather. The heat may have caused Flight 800 to explode. That plane sat on the tarmac with its air conditioning running. Investigators believe hot air from the air conditioner overheated the plane's fuel. The early evidence is pointing to a repeat of TWA Flight 800.
So it looks really very, very similar. So therefore, our immediate focus was essentially the central fuel tank.
Three weeks after the crash, the Jan Steen, a sophisticated salvage vessel, arrives in the Taiwan Strait. It's equipped with divers, a diving chamber, and a remote-operated submarine, complete with sonar and video cameras.
The NTSB were tasked with manning the recovery vessel and watching video screens from the ROV.
Using sonar, investigators have located the wreckage of Flight 611 deep underwater.
All right, to the right a bit.
Clint Cruikshanks knows all the pieces that make up a 747, but he's never seen them like this.
It was really quite a shock when I first saw pieces on the floor of the ocean. With only the lighting of the ROV to guide you, you would notice something that looked like an airplane part. The ROV would then circle around the part, looking at it from all angles.
Cruikshank's job is to help the Taiwanese identify specific airplane parts among the wreckage.
I think it takes a different kind of mind to be able to look at a mangled part and kind of straighten it out in your head to really determine where it comes from on the airplane.
All right, a little bit more to the right. All right, go back. There, okay, that's definitely a piece of wing. Let's mark it.
Once a piece is identified, its GPS coordinates get recorded. The GPS mapping tells investigators that the debris is spread out over 325 square kilometers. It will be difficult to track down specific pieces of the plane. 25 days after the crash of Flight 611, the plane's two black boxes have been found. One contains voice recordings of conversations in the cockpit. The other, data from the plane's flight computer. Either could hold the clues that will reveal what happened during the final minutes of the flight. If the answer is on the tape, investigators may not have to bring up more wreckage to the surface. The data is critical.
Everybody ready?
Investigators begin with the plane's cockpit voice recorder. They hope that the pilots will have said something to each other about an emergency on board.
Welcome aboard, China Airlines.
The recording begins about 10 minutes before the plane took off.
20.
Preparations for the flight sound normal.
Okay, after start checklist.
After start, anti-ice.
The crew checks all their systems and runs through standard checklists.
Off. Off.
It was very, very experienced crew. Both the captain and the first officers were quite seasoned.
Dynasty 611, runway 06, wind 050 at 9 are cleared for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, Dynasty 611.
Takeoff.
'80.
Check.
V1. Rotate.
Flap 5.
1, green. Okay, flap up.
Investigators listen to more than conversations. They also want to hear if the plane itself was making any unusual sounds.
Noises on the cockpit voice recorder can either be audible spoken words that are recorded by a microphone, or they can be structural discrepancies that are picked up by the microphone.
Taipei Control, descend in
If anything, though, this cockpit is unusually quiet.
Unit Air 608, reduce speed 210 knots.
The captain seems relaxed.
200 knots, roger. Unit Airway 608.
The microphones pick up the sound of controllers talking to other planes.
Trans Asia 536, fly heading 050.
Heading 050.
In the moments before the disaster, nothing seems wrong. There are no unusual sounds.
Now descend and maintain 250.
The final words spoken in the cockpit are from Captain Yi Ching Feng.
2,000.
He calls out the distance to their cruising altitude. That's followed by the sound of a chime, alerting the crew that they're nearing 35,000 feet. And then the cockpit microphone picks up the sound of the plane breaking apart. Half a second later, the recording stops.
The cockpit voice recorder indicated that the conversation of the cockpit crew were totally normal, and all of a sudden just died.
The recorders told us that something happened, but it wasn't enough to tell us exactly what it was yet. Many things had been ruled out by then, but we didn't have the golden nugget. We didn't have the real piece of evidence that told us what initiated the breakup of this 747.
After the disappointment of the voice recorder, studying the wreckage becomes the only option for investigators. They focus their efforts on items that can either prove or disprove the link to TWA Flight 800.
So we play a lot of focus on the wreckage observation and examination of the central fuel tank.
On July the 12th, 48 days after the crash.
Okay, whoa. A little to the left, please.
Success.
All right. That's definitely the central fuel tank. Okay, let's mark that. Let's bring that up.
The tank joins the sea of wreckage piling up at the pier. Investigators study it closely for any evidence that it exploded. If it did explode like the TWA tank, it would be curled and twisted. And the metal would be bent outwards. But this fuel tank is different.
And we found the central fuel tank was relatively intact.
And it's crumpled inwards. Unlike the tank from the TWA flight, there's no soot. There would be if the jet fuel inside had ignited.
So at that time, we pretty much ruled out it was the cause of the central fuel tank.
The wreckage recovered so far has also forced investigators to abandon another theory, that a bomb brought down the plane.
None of the wreckage showed any evidence of sooting, any kind of explosive damage.
The China Airlines crash was neither a repeat of TWA Flight 800, nor a deliberate bombing. Investigators are running out of leads. As more wreckage is identified and recovered, investigators find an intriguing clue. It's discovered when they examine a series of small vents from Flight 611. All commercial jetliners have dozens of these vents near the floor. They're essentially pressure release valves. They're called dado panels. And there's only one reason for them to open. If the cargo area underneath the passengers were to suddenly decompress, the pressurized air above would exert so much force on the floor that it could collapse and damage vital flight controls. That's precisely what happened to a Turkish Airlines flight in 1974. The pilots couldn't control their plane after their cargo door blew out. If the floor on that flight hadn't collapsed, the pilots may have been able to save the plane. After that accident, the NTSB recommended that manufacturers install many more relief vents between a passenger plane's upper and lower levels. If there is decompression in the cargo area, the dado panels open automatically and release the pressure on the floor. There were 65 dado panels on the China Airlines flight. 19 of them were recovered from the ocean. 4 recovered panels were in the open position. It tells investigators that there must have been a sudden loss of pressure beneath the passenger cabin. But it doesn't tell them what caused it. The dado panels lead investigators closer to solving the mystery of this crash. But it's just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. There are hundreds of pieces of wreckage to be examined for clues. Kay Young now wonders if a few of those pieces might be able to tell him where the decompression originated.
I've been reading about the trajectory analysis you did on Flight 800. I'd like to try it.
Ballistic trajectory analysis is a technique that US investigators used to figure out how TWA Flight 800 disintegrated. It's impossible to do without specialized computers.
We figure that because it disintegrated in the midair, the ballistic analysis from which the NTSB did in TWA 800 could be very, very useful to us, to help us to analyze the trajectory of the flying debris.
The analysis is based on a simple fact. The pieces that came off the plane first would be the first to hit the water. If investigators can figure out which pieces those were, they'll know where the trouble began. Radar that had been tracking the plane as it climbed also ended up tracking pieces of debris as they fell. The salvage workers have recorded the precise location of those same pieces of wreckage. Their logs could match a specific piece to its radar track. Investigators know the wind speed on the day of the crash. And they can obtain precise information about ocean currents. The last piece of the puzzle comes from the plane's flight data recorder. The plane's altitude, speed, and direction at the time of the breakup. As they're brought to the dock, every single piece of wreckage has been logged and numbered for identification.
327.
Kay Young selects 18 pieces of wreckage for the computer analysis. Some from the front, some from the middle, and some from the back of the plane.
199.
Along with all the other data, he'll feed information about each item's weight and shape into the computer.
526.
Based on where the pieces fell, the computer should be able to calculate which of those 18 pieces was the first to come off the plane.
Can we see when each one of those items separated from the aircraft?
All of the data paints a telling picture of what happened at 35,000 feet. Kay Young gets to see how Flight 611 broke up, from beginning to end.
The tail came off first.
Along with the dado panels, it's a very important clue.
So that pretty much indicating that there's something happened in the back of the aircraft, rather than something happened in the forward part.
Investigators are now keen to recover items from the rear of the plane. Hundreds of pieces of wreckage are piling up at the pier on the Penghu Islands. The NTSB sends metallurgist Frank Zakar to Taiwan to examine the wreckage.
I was walking along the yard where the wreckage was placed, and at that time I walked up to item 640 and noticed that there were some peculiar areas of interest that I wanted to look at a little bit further.
With this battered piece of metal, investigators have struck gold.
There was definitely a eureka moment on the dock. That was, hey, we might have something here.
Hey, it's Frank. I think we found your golden nugget.
Item number 640 would give investigators a revealing glimpse into the past and lead them to conclude that the crash of Flight 611 actually began 22 years earlier.
Let's get as many pictures as we can.
The massive piece of fuselage that has caught Frank Zakar's attention is exactly what investigators have been searching for. It includes a piece of the belly, the sidewall, and the rear cargo door. It's from the back of the plane, precisely where the analysis told them the breakup had begun.
This piece of wreckage was highly unusual. It wasn't what we were seeing on all the other pieces, and it immediately drew our attention and drew the focus of the investigation.
The way most of the metal is torn suggests it ripped apart violently in midair.
Aerodynamically, as an airplane's moving through the air, if it were to break apart, just the force of the incoming air at over 500 miles per hour will just break up perfectly good structure. That's what we call an overload fracture. So most of the pieces that came up early were just indicative of that kind of overload.
When metal breaks due to overload or overstress, it comes apart at an angle. But the fractured edges of piece number 640 aren't angled, they're flat.
What do you think?
It's definitely not overstress. It's metal fatigue.
Fatigue fractures happen when metal is stressed repeatedly over time until it breaks. It looks very different from a stress fracture.
Typically, a metal fatigue crack will have a flat appearance. It'll be very smooth.
That's exactly the kind of crack that investigators observe on piece number 640. That tells them it didn't break off the plane suddenly as it fell from the sky. This piece separated from the plane over time. Had it caused the deaths of 225 people?
There was much more work that needed to be done. A detailed analysis of the piece had to be done in order to see if this in fact was the smoking gun.
There's something else about this piece that stands out. It has a metal patch on it. It's called a doubler plate. It's the equivalent of a patch on a punctured tire. It's not unusual to find numerous doubler plates on older planes like this one.
A doubler plate is like a patch that you put over fuselage skin. If there were to be a tear or a blemish, a crack identified, you'd want to repair the fuselage back to its original strength, and one way to do that is to put a doubler plate or a patch right over the existing structure.
At some point, this section of the 747 had been repaired. Investigators need to know why it was fixed and how that was done.
We're looking for repair to the aft lower lobe. Whatever it was big.
Investigators sift through 22 years of documents. But the records are sketchy. Finding details on one particular repair could take time. There's something about this particular doubler that catches Frank Zakar's attention.
The outside of the fuselage contained longitudinal streaks that appeared to emanate from between the doubler plate and the skin.
Something is leaking from underneath the metal patch.
Was there a possibility that the skin had broken, cracked, and was there any fuel or air coming out from between the doubler and the fuselage? And that warranted further examination.
Let's cut it from here to here and send this piece to Chongshan.
In order to see what's underneath the doubler, a large section of Piece 640 is sent to a lab. No evidence has been found of structural or mechanical problems with Boeing's 747-200 airplanes. Taiwanese aviation officials have no reason to keep the planes on the ground. The Chung-Shan Institute of Science and Technology is a military research facility. It's at the forefront of Taiwan's space program. This is where investigators take a section of piece number 640 for a closer examination. The NTSB's Frank Zakar finds a telling clue on the crack itself.
When I looked at the fracture surface, I found that this one specific area was covered with aluminum oxide, pretty much similar to rust on a car.
Years of exposure to oxygen changes the color of metal. The discoloration tells investigators that this particular crack at the rear of the airplane has been there for a very long time. Then, when the doubler is finally removed, investigators get a look at the aluminium skin underneath. They're intrigued by what they see.
When we disassembled the doubler plate from the skin, we noticed that there were some fairly long gouge marks.
This is beyond the kind of damage a doubler is meant to patch.
That was an aha moment that we might have something here.
The search of the plane's documents also pays off. The records contain a very short reference to a mishap 22 years earlier, when this plane was only 6 months old.
Speed is low, sir. Watch it.
Its tail scraped the runway while landing.
Did you feel that?
It happens when a plane lands or takes off at too steep an angle. It's called a tail strike.
009 Hong Kong Tower. We observed smoke and sparks from your tail on landing.
Roger, Hong Kong Tower. We'll have that looked at. Tail strike, sir. I better log that.
It is a relatively common occurrence. It's not a good thing. Some airplanes even have what's called a bumper in that portion of the aft fuselage, so that if the tail ever does get too close to the ground, instead of sacrificing skin from the fuselage, you might have this sacrificial bumper that will take that wear.
Tail strike damage is routinely repaired. Investigators want to know how China Airlines went about fixing the plane. They can only find a brief mention of the repairs that were done in the plane's logbook.
That's all there is?
That's all we could find.
There's not a lot of detail in China Airlines records.
China Airlines indicating they could not find any of those documents. And when we start looking for it, we could not find any. And they said they probably got lost.
The documents that do exist show that the day after the tail strike, China Airlines did a temporary repair. Workers attached a large aluminium plate over the damaged area.
What do we know about the permanent repair?
It doesn't get much better.
A more permanent repair was to be carried out within 4 months.
This is what we got.
The maintenance records indicated that the permanent repair was done in accordance with Boeing recommendations in their structural repair manual. Evidence that we uncovered indicate that the repair was not done per the Boeing repair manual.
According to the manual, many of the scratches on the plane were too deep to be repaired. The entire damaged section should have been cut out and replaced.
You have to follow certain procedures, and the Boeing structural repair manual indicating very clearly what you should do step by step.
22 years later, investigators can tell that for some reason the damaged piece was not replaced. The scratches from the tail strike are still there. China Airlines engineers tell investigators that the scratched area was too large to cut out, so they sanded the scratches down instead.
In the event of scratching, It depends on how deep the scratches are. If they're not very deep, they can be blended out. But if the scratches are too deep, the repair technique that's called for is to actually cut out all of the scratched material and then design a doubler patch that's larger by a big percentage of the structure that was originally removed.
The scratches weren't sanded down or cut out. They're still there. Maintenance workers then made one final mistake.
They put the doubler plate right over the scratched material. The doubler plate that they put on was not 30% larger than the affected area. In fact, it was barely, maybe not even in certain locations, larger than the area that was scratched.
Even though the repair wasn't done according to Boeing's instructions, the way it was logged made it seem like it was. So for 22 years, anyone reading that entry would assume the damaged area had been cut out as it should have been.
Pieces were really starting to fall into place now. Once we saw this piece of structure that had the fatigue cracks in it, and we realized that it came from a structural repair that was not done properly, that was left to fly for 20 years.
Airborne passing 1,600.
Things began to make sense.
By covering an improper repair with a doubler, and then documenting the repair as meeting Boeing's standards, the workers made their mistake impossible to detect.
What was so insidious about this improper repair was that the doubler plate hid all of the damage. So if you weren't there watching them do this repair improperly, you wouldn't know that it was done improperly. You would have assumed that the structure underneath had been cut out the way it was supposed to.
And every time the plane took off over the next 20 years, the concealed problem got worse and worse. The air inside a commercial airplane is pressurized. As the plane climbs, air is forced into the cabin to keep the pressure inside the plane greater than the pressure outside. It's like inflating a tire. The inside air pushes against the plane's skin.
Each time the airplane pressurizes, pressure built up inside the fuselage of the airplane, that crack could open up for a certain amount of inches or microns or millimeters.
The plane's skin expanded and contracted a little bit every time. Because they weren't properly repaired, the cracks grew and spread. Eventually, the crack grew into a stunning 2.3 meters.
If you were charting the crack, you would have seen very slow growth early, but as time went on, the growth was getting bigger and bigger.
A small scratch had grown into an enormous problem. Then in May 2002, as Flight 611 climbed, that problem killed 225 people.
As the airplane climbed in altitude and the fuselage was pressured, that put enough strain on this growing crack that it reached its critical length. And from there, it just spread like a spider web. It went in all directions, and it probably looped all the way around the fuselage to the point where the entire aft section of the airplane just broke off from the rest of the structure.
The plane went into a steep dive. The force of the air on what was left of the plane quickly ripped it to pieces. Investigators know that an unseen crack caused Flight 611 to break apart. They now discover that China Airlines came heartbreakingly close to finding that crack and saving 225 lives. The China Airlines 747 was in regular service for 22 years following the improper repair to its skin. It took off and landed more than 20,000 times. Over the years, mechanics would have scrutinized the plane.
There's regular inspections per the Boeing maintenance program that have to be performed on the airplane.
But the massive crack forming at the rear of the plane was never detected. Another accident in another country almost led China Airlines to discover the hidden damage. In 1988, the roof peeled off an aging Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines. As a result of that incident, the Federal Aviation Administration laid out an inspection procedure for older planes. Airlines around the world were forced to inspect their planes much more diligently for corrosion and cracks. The regulation called for airlines to reevaluate all existing repairs to a plane's structure.
Indications on this airplane were that if they had looked at the maintenance records and compared it to the repair, they would have had to remove the repair and redo it.
China Airlines took the first steps of the new procedure in 2001, a year before the accident. The airline identified and photographed 31 different doublers on the 747, including the one over the catastrophic crack. Those pictures show investigators that China Airlines overlooked a vital clue that could have warned them of the looming danger.
We examined the photographs that China Airlines took of the repair and noticed that there was some issues that may have warranted further investigation.
Investigators see a dark brown stain on the outside of the plane. It's the same mysterious staining that led Frank Zakar to suspect there was a hole behind the doubler when he first saw it on the pier. So why hadn't this stain raised alarms before the crash? For years, passengers on China Airlines' doomed 747 were allowed to smoke. They filled the pressurized air with nicotine. The smoke was being forced out through the crack at the rear of the plane. Over time, that smoke left a nicotine stain on the outside of the plane.
It was very vivid. Any experienced maintenance engineer be able to spot it right immediately.
Smoking hadn't been allowed on China Airlines for 7 years before the crash. It tells investigators that the crack in the plane had been there for at least that long. But instead of investigating the source of the staining,
we need to conduct the new inspection when we do our next major check.
China Airlines scheduled the second part of the FAA's procedure, a detailed inspection of the repaired areas.
And that would be the 7C check, currently scheduled for November the 2nd, 2002.
But the 747 never made it to November 2nd, 2002. It came apart over the Taiwan Strait 5 months before the inspection that would have undoubtedly uncovered its hidden flaw. Investigators want to prevent a similar accident from ever happening again. They recommend that aviation agencies around the world immediately inspect repairs for any possible hidden damage.
We were no longer going to accept just a quick write-up that the repair was done properly. If the repair didn't have all the necessary documentation to allow us to know it was done properly, we were requiring operators to take doubler plates off and do a visual inspection of the structure underneath.
The National Transportation Safety Board issues its own recommendations. The board asks that maintenance personnel be warned of the consequences of hiding the kind of damage that could lead to the structural failure of an airplane.
The moral of this story is that the repair has to be done properly. As a mechanic, when you're doing work on an airplane, you're not thinking about the people who might be flying on that fuselage 20 years from now, but their safety depends on you doing the repair properly.
China Airlines has revised the way its fleet is inspected and maintained. Its safety record has improved dramatically since the crash of Flight 611. Investigators also proposed the development of new tools that would allow mechanics to detect damage behind a doubler. Such tools are being used today.
Boeing developed a non-destructive procedure that can find cracks in the fuselage underneath the doubler.
That device uses ultrasound, sound waves that travel through metal. It can reveal damage underneath a doubler. It's the same technology that allows doctors to observe a fetus while it's still inside the womb. The device would have been able to detect the crack behind Flight 611's doubler plate. But the technology has some limitations.
A great number of hours are required just to do one specific area of the airplane, but the technology is getting better.
The problems that led to the China Airlines disaster are not going away. Planes the world over are getting older. And older planes need to be more thoroughly inspected for cracks. 6 years after the China Airlines crash, Southwest Airlines in the United States was hit with a record-breaking fine. $10.2 million for missing inspections designed to find cracks.
The finding of Southwest brings back into focus how important it is to do maintenance properly on an airplane.
A proper program of maintenance and inspections can be costly. But as China Airlines showed, the price of not maintaining aging planes is even costlier. Zurich Airport, November 2001. Crossair Flight 3597 is one of the few planes left to land.
The commander was flying out of Zurich for the last 20 years, so he was really used to this airport.
Crossair 359.
The lone controller in the tower tracks the approach.
Approach runway 28 for you.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
But for some reason, the crew can't find the runway.
He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
And the flight ends in disaster.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? We have a possible emergency and approach.
He collided with a hill, so obviously he was too low.
A terrible mistake sent a passenger jet dangerously off course, killing 24 people. The clues will lead investigators to a trained professional with an astonishing past.
Mayday, Mayday.
Crossair Flight 3597 is cruising at 27,000 feet above Germany. As the autopilot flies the plane, the crew begins reviewing procedures for their landing.
According to the report, the apron and taxiways are wet. Braking action's not specified.
So the friction report is missing?
Indeed.
That usually means they haven't been out to check lately.
Indeed.
It's the last flight of the day on this busy European route. The 660-kilometer journey from Berlin south to Zurich takes only an hour and a half. There are many empty seats on board. A group of 21 passengers never showed up for the flight. Internet entrepreneur Peter Hogenkamp is returning from a business trip in Germany with his partner, Jacqueline Badran.
On that day, we wanted to take the train, but we had to be in Zurich for that opening ceremony of that trade show, so we decided, okay, so we need to go by plane.
I've got to get some sleep.
It had been a very busy day, so we were very tired when we arrived at the airport.
Among the passengers is the girl band Passion Fruit, Germany's answer to the Spice Girls. They're on their way to perform the last show of a concert tour.
I was shocked when suddenly all the passion fruits, all the 3 of them, were coming over and they were sitting right in front of us.
Just what I needed.
Flight 3597 is an Avro 146 airliner. It's a British-made jet popular with regional airlines like Crossair. Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz is in command. He's been with the airline for more than 22 years, having served as a pilot and as an instructor.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall. Visibility 3.
First Officer Stefan Lehrer is a newcomer to the airline. He's had his pilot's license for just a year and a half. He was hired by Crossair right out of flight school.
The passion fruits were being quite noisy. They were excited. I think they went from one gig to the other. So they were still in their stage clothes. I said, oh my God, do I really need this? Can I just sleep?
It's probably okay to move.
We decided to move back a few rows and change the side where we were sitting, so we were in a very quiet area then.
Crosshair 3597, clear to flight level 160.
The flight is slightly behind schedule. It's due to land in Zurich in less than half an hour.
According to the latest information, we'll be using runway 14.
What kind of approach?
ILS approach.
Okay.
An ILS, or Instrument Landing System approach, means the pilots will be guided to the runway by radio signals beamed from the airport.
And a decision altitude of 1,602 feet. Call me 100 above minimums.
Okay, I'll call 100 above minimums.
The plane's sophisticated computers will do most of the work getting them down. At Zurich Airport, the weather is getting worse. It's snowing, and visibility is dropping.
Crossair 3191, turn left heading 150.
In the tower, controllers have started a nightly routine. A supervisor sends out a message notifying crews that runway 14 is being taken out of service because of a controversial new law. Planes landing on runway 14 must fly over Germany on their approach. But people in Germany have long complained about the noise.
Because of the political issue, airplanes had to fly over Switzerland in their final descent to the airport of Zurich for noise reasons. There was no other operational or weather reasons whatsoever. It was purely political.
Switzerland has agreed to shut down runway 14 after 10 p.m. to keep landing planes out of German airspace and use runway 28 instead. The crew hasn't received this information yet. But First Officer Lehrer is familiar with the new rule.
Should I ask if it's still runway 14? It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's still 14.
Zurich approach, Crossair 3597. Please confirm the approach in use is the ILS 14.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. It will be a VOR DME. Approach runway 28 for you.
Oh, hell. What next? Okay, fine.
Unlike runway 14 with its sophisticated instrument landing system, runway 28 is not equipped for ILS landings. Instead, it has a less accurate navigational system. It's called VOR DME. A radio beacon sends information to an aircraft about its distance from the runway and whether it's left or right of it. It provides no guidance on the plane's altitude. pilots would rather not make VOR approaches because they place a greater workload on the flight crew.
He would always prefer an ILS approach because he gets guidance on the approach slope. And he can also use his autopilot to guide him down literally on ground to the runway.
Because of its less precise technology, Runway 28 was rarely used for landings before the new noise law.
Okay then, rebriefing for runway 28. That would be chart 13-2.
Now Captain Lutz abandons the ILS approach he was planning and prepares his first officer for the new non-precision approach.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The crew goes over every detail of how they will approach Zurich Airport.
Brasidingen, Zurich. East 6,000 feet.
There are only a few planes left to land tonight,
3597.
including Flight 3597 and 2 other Crossair flights just ahead of it. As the aircraft approach the runway, controllers need to keep them apart.
Crossair 3597, reduce speed to 180 or less.
Speed 180 or less, Crossair 3597.
Captain Lutz makes the final turn to line his jet up with the runway.
160 knots.
The plane is now in the thick of the heavy weather surrounding Zurich. At the airport, the second-last Crossair flight touches down on runway 28. Now, with only Flight 3597 to land, the supervisor decides to head home early. The controller handling the aircraft is the only controller left in the tower.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891.
She gets a report from the plane that just landed.
Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
But Captain Lutz knows Zurich Airport well. He continues towards the runway.
Gear down.
The plane begins the final stage of its approach.
Cabin crew,
prepare for landing.
Captain Lutz begins slowing the jet and puts it into a steep descent.
Six miles is checked.
Yes.
Flaps 3-3.
Flaps 3-3 selected.
Final check.
Final check. Confirm 3 greens.
Is checked. 116 knots.
The descent gets even steeper.
Full flaps. Set.
Checked.
Flight 3597 is about 3 minutes from the runway. Captain Lutz expects it to come into view any second now.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Passengers prepare themselves for landing.
We were pretty close to the airport, so you think, okay, this is going smoothly, but it was dark and it was snowing, so we couldn't see anything.
In the tower, the controller monitors the flight to make sure it's lined up with the runway.
Crossair 3597, cleared to land, runway 28.
.24, the minimum.
2-4.
The flight has hit decision height, 2,400 feet above sea level, 1,000 feet above the ground near Zurich.
Decision height is the minimum height you can descend before. You need to decide whether you can see the runway and continue the approach visually, or you have to make a decision to go around.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
500. 500.
Captain Lutz still can't see the runway lights, but knows that the flight ahead of him had the same problem.
He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
They should almost be on top of the runway by now. But for some reason, they still can't see it.
Make it go around?
Crossair 3597.
The crew decides to abort the landing.
Go around!
Go around.
And pushes the plane to its limits in an effort to get it to climb. Captain Lutz throttles up his plane's 4 jet engines as he aborts his landing at Zurich Airport. But it's too late. There's not enough time for the engines to get to full power and clear a tree-covered hill suddenly looming dead ahead. Residents of a nearby village witness Flight 3597's final moments.
I was walking down with my dog. All of a sudden I saw that aircraft coming from behind the forest, the little hill. And I thought, oh, it's very low and it's not on the same route as aircrafts normally are coming to land at the airport of Zurich.
The jet clips the treetops.
Suddenly, it was shaking very hard. What's happening? Something is wrong.
Moments later, the aircraft plunges into the hillside.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy?
All of a sudden, the whole sky in the west was getting really orange, like a big fire, like an explosion.
The impact tears the aircraft apart.
The wings broke off and the fuel is in the wings, so the flames really sort of shot inside the plane.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? This is Zurich Tower. We have a possible emergency in approach sector east. I repeat, approach sector east.
Crossair Flight 3597 has crashed near the village of Bassersdorf, northeast of Zurich. Some people have survived the accident, including Peter Hogenkamp and Jacqueline Badran.
I don't have any memory of how we really walked out, because the back was cut off and we were just able to walk out there.
One member of Passion Fruit also survives, but her 2 bandmates seated just 1 row ahead of her have been killed.
I thought, you know, when they give you these instructions in the beginning when you get on the plane, how come they never tell you how far you have to run away from a burning plane? Because they never tell you.
Let's get away from here.
So we thought, I don't know, 100 meters.
Within minutes, emergency workers get to the crash site.
Hey! Over here! Over here!
24 of the 33 people on board Flight 3597 are dead, including Captain Lutz and First Officer Stefan Lehrer. Daniel Connect, an investigator from Switzerland's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, arrives at the scene.
I got the call from our rescue service about 10:30 in the evening. Half an hour later, I was on the accident site. The rear part of the fuselage was quite intact. It was also the region where most of the survivors step out without injury.
For Peter Hogenkamp and his partner, it appears that moving to the rear of the plane saved their lives.
I think it was just good luck. I think it would have been a whole different story if we wouldn't have changed seats. So the passion fruits may have saved their lives.
While rescuers care for the survivors, Connect and his team survey the crash site. The location of the wreckage far from the airport is of interest to the investigators.
4 kilometers and 50 meters from the runway.
The aircraft was not where he was intended to be. He collided with a hill east of runway 28, so obviously he was too low. And the first question was, why was this aircraft too low?
The black box flight recorders are found in the wreckage. They're in good condition. Investigators are well aware that this is the worst aviation disaster on Swiss territory in over a decade. They're under pressure to find answers fast. While work continues at the crash, a command post is established nearby. Jean Auvernet heads the Swiss Investigation Bureau. He takes charge of the Crossair file.
The public was very anxious about this crash. The media were raising many questions, so we naturally had to open a more in-depth investigation.
The accident happened at the end of a long day for Captain Lutz, but given his background, investigators must consider other causes.
We knew that the captain was very experienced. He had about 17,000 flight hours during his whole career. Flight instructor, flight examiner, within the company for more than 20 years.
The flight recorders are sent to a lab in Paris to extract their data. At the same time, investigators have begun retrieving fragments of wreckage from the crash site. They look for telltale signs of trouble.
The position of switches is very important. Also, if you have some indication panels, for example, with bulbs in it, you can, after a crash, you can analyze the different wires in the bulbs, and then you can determine which, for example, indications or even warnings were active at the moment of the impact.
An investigator comes across an intriguing piece of wreckage. Oil gauges provide information about the oil flowing to the plane's 4 turbofan engines. Curiously, one of them is installed upside down.
This raised a lot of questions for us and for the media. Everyone wanted to know how you could fly a plane with an instrument installed upside down. It wasn't a very important instrument. You could still read it, even if it was installed upside down.
But if this obvious problem was never fixed, what else could be wrong with the plane?
Obviously, there were maintenance issues here. We looked at how the company was doing the maintenance of the planes.
While this review is being launched, investigators study the plane's engines to determine if they were running at the time of the crash. Soil, tree branches, and other debris lodged inside the engines suggest they were.
We checked them out visually, and we saw that the 4 engines were turning in the moment of the accident.
Authorities need to be sure. They will have to check their findings against data from the flight recorders. In the meantime, the location of the crash suggests something may have tragically misled the crew on their descent towards Zurich Airport. Connect focuses on the flight charts they used to plan their approach.
Is the problem with the approach, or is the problem with the aircraft? This kind of question was dominant when we started the investigation.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The approach chart provides pilots with directions to the runway,
Transat Zurich.
details about radio frequencies, as well as altitudes and speed for various stages of the landing. When investigators study an approach chart like the one the crew used, they make a shocking discovery. The chart does not show the hill that the plane hit.
An approach chart is a very important thing because an indication which is not correct on this approach chart could mislead a crew and so easily make them do something wrong.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall.
A faulty chart would certainly have been a danger to a crew unfamiliar with Zurich Airport. But Lutz had flown in and out of Zurich countless times. He and his first officer were both based in the city.
The commander was flying out of Zurich, I think, for the last 15 to 20 years. So he was really used to this airport.
Investigators conclude that the approach chart, while faulty, could have tripped up some crews, but not this one. Some definitive news finally arrives. The engine data from the black box confirms the observations at the crash site.
We could see quite easily that the engines worked absolutely normally.
Another potential cause of the accident is eliminated from the list: mechanical failure. Investigators now consider a different possibility.
I was covering the approach west position on the night of the accident.
Could air traffic control have somehow mishandled the plane? Investigators study records from the night of the accident and make a disconcerting find. Zurich Airport's control tower was understaffed at the time of the accident.
He left before his shift ended.
The supervisor in the tower went home early, leaving a lone controller to guide Flight 3597 in for its landing.
She was relatively young, and let's say she didn't have that much experience.
Investigators now study transcripts of conversations between that air traffic controller and the flight crew, looking for signs she made a mistake.
Crosshair 3597, you're identified.
Crosshair 3597.
Speed 180 or less.
Crosshair 28 for you.
Crosshair 3597.
Zurich approach. Crosshair 3597.
Cleared to land.
They find no indication the controller gave the crew faulty instructions. But they do come across the radio call by the pilot of the Crosshair flight that landed minutes earlier.
Zurich Tower, this is Crosshair 3891. Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
That pilot warned of poor conditions on the approach to runway 28.
She had options.
They wonder why the controller didn't shut the runway down. Because of poor visibility, she could have reopened runway 14 in spite of the noise bylaw. This would have allowed the crews to make an instrument approach. But she didn't do that.
Thank you, Crosshair 3891. Have a good evening.
It would have been much easier to fly Alice approaches in this kind of weather, regardless of this political issue.
It's suspected that without her supervisor present, the controller lacked the experience to make such an important call.
So it's clear that to make the decision not to allow an approach on runway 28 and instead make it on runway 14 demanded a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of courage.
However, Captain Lutz also heard the same warning.
28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
Gear down.
He kept going in spite of it. Investigators are now certain that the controller was in no way responsible.
A pilot can always say no. He can always reject the clearance. If he thinks that landing is probably not possible, he is free to reject an approach clearance and ask for a different one.
Jean Auvernet can't understand why Captain Lutz didn't do exactly that. He should have known that he didn't have to make a non-precision approach in bad weather.
When we saw the mistake the pilot had made, we immediately asked ourselves, well, how's it possible? Because for an experienced pilot who is an instructor, this was a really basic mistake.
Auvernet is beginning to wonder if something in Lutz's long career is hiding clues about his behavior on the night of the accident. One by one, investigators are ruling out the possible causes of the crash of Crossair Flight 3597. They hope the answer lies in the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, of the doomed jet. After waiting many days for its data to be sent back from France, they now pore over it carefully, listening for any clues that might explain why the plane was flying so close to the ground, so far from the airport.
Ilnav is engaged.
Authorities get more than they expected. Not only is the CVR complete, but Captain Lutz offers a running commentary on everything he does.
And on inbound track 275. Speed is checked, flaps 18.
It's practically a roadmap to understanding what went on in the cockpit.
Flaps 33.
That's not usual that the pilot flying is talking so much about what he is doing or what he is seeing. And for the investigation, this helped a lot.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Investigators learned that the crew of Flight 3597 was looking for the runway and believed it would soon come into view.
From the CVR, we saw that the commander and also his co-pilot were not feeling some fear or feeling that something was not going as they planned.
But what they didn't know was that the plane was actually 4 miles shy of its target.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
300.
Captain Lutz obviously thought his jet was closer to the runway than it was. Investigators consider the possibility he was misled by his distance measuring equipment, or DME. It's supposed to tell pilots how far they are from the airport.
The DME indication would have given this distance, and then he would have detected immediately that he was below the approach pass.
Perhaps the DME from Flight 3597 was faulty. It's been recovered from the wreckage, but it's impossible to tell what information it gave the pilots. However, there is another way to check whether the instrument was functioning or not.
The DME distance is not recorded on the FDR, but on 2 occasions the pilots mentioned the distance.
6 miles is checked.
Yes.
But was Captain Lutz really 6 miles out from the runway when he made that report? Investigators compare the time Lutz checked his DME with radar data on the aircraft's location at that exact same time. They can see that when Lutz's instruments were telling him he was 6 miles out, that's precisely where he was.
So we knew that the pilots had an indication for the distance available at that time.
An instrument problem can now be crossed off the list as a factor in the crash, which only heightens the mystery.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
If the instrument was working, why did Lutz think he was closer to the runway than he actually was? The answer lies not in what investigators hear on the cockpit voice recorder, but what they don't hear.
I don't see anything after 6 miles.
Do we have ground contact?
Neither pilot read out a DME check after the 6-mile reading.
Yes.
It tells investigators that Lutz wasn't monitoring his vital instrument during the final minutes of his approach. Instead, he was preoccupied with spotting the lights of the runway. That's not what pilots are supposed to do.
The pilot flying is supposed to keep his eyes on the instruments because all the information he needs is there. He only switches to flying by sight when the non-flying pilot says, "Runway in sight." Only then can the captain take his eyes off the instruments and fly by sight because the landing is performed visually.
parce que l'atterrissage en tant que tel se fait à vue.
If Lutz had checked his instruments, he would have known how far from the runway he actually was. But how had he ended up such a long distance from it?
400. Confirm 3 greens.
400.
Is checked. 116 knots.
Further analysis of the black box data reveals that Lutz put his plane into a steep descent as it began its final approach to Zurich Airport. But it's readily apparent his approach profile was out of sync with the trajectory laid out in his chart. The approach profile for runway 28 calls for pilots to make a gradual and steady descent, which would bring them to 2,400 feet after they've cleared the hills around Zurich. Then pilots have to level off until they spot the runway. When investigators compare the approach Lutz made with the approach profile he was supposed to follow, they find that his overly steep descent brought him to 2,400 feet well before he cleared the hills. Then he continued to descend until he hit the ground. It's beginning to look like Lutz had violated one of the cardinal rules of flying. Aircraft making non-precision approaches are supposed to level off at minimum descent altitude or safe height until they have the runway in view. This safe height is intended to keep the aircraft above any potential hazards.
It's really a basic error. Every pilot is trained to respect such minimums. Not only with VOR DME approaches, but also with ILS approaches.
But Captain Lutz kept his aircraft in a steep descent without even pausing at 2,400 feet. The logical next question for investigators, could he see the runway or not?
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
What does he mean by ground contact?
They need to know if it was even possible for Lutz to see the runway when he reported ground contact. They retrace his steps in a simulator, programmed with the weather he was facing that night.
6 miles from runway, altitude 3,300 feet. 4.8 miles, 2,400 feet. Still no runway in sight.
Non, il ne pouvait pas.
No, he couldn't see the runway because there was a hill between him and the runway, and at that altitude, there's no way he could see it.
À l'altitude de laquelle il était voir la piste.
The conclusion? Captain Lutz had clearly violated his minimum descent altitude.
Whether there is flat terrain or hills, minimums are set accordingly, and in no way you can just bust the minimums, whether there's hills or not.
This discovery raises questions not just about Lutz's actions, but his young first officers as well.
2-4, the minimum.
2-4.
We're continuing on.
A first officer should not let his captain breach minimum descent altitudes.
Il aurait pu intervenir.
The co-pilot could have said, no, stop, we can't see the runway, we're not descending.
On voit pas la piste, on descend pas.
He considered his captain an old pilot with a lot of experience, not making any mistakes. Most probably he was trusting him too much. And also by being submissive, maybe he wouldn't speak up on time, just to keep harmony in the cockpit.
There were no mechanical failures or instrument problems with the plane. Nor was the air traffic controller negligent in any way. But it is now clear that Captain Lutz made a series of catastrophic piloting errors that doomed Flight 3597 and claimed the lives of 24 people. Investigators dig deeper into Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz's flying record to see if there's anything in his long background that could explain why he crashed Flight 3597. What they discover is truly alarming. Lutz applied to flight school when he was 17 years old. He was rejected 3 times because of his lack of education. He finally got his license at the age of 20, but continually failed exams to upgrade due to his inadequate comprehension of navigation systems. Captain Lutz may have had a long career, but it was not a stellar one.
Years of flying and flying hours don't say anything about competence.
For some reason, though, his record as a below-average pilot didn't prevent Crossair from hiring him in 1979.
There was a red line through his career where several incidents happened before and he had missed several checks. Well, he had some limits. But what's hard to understand for me is that they were identified. And decision was made to keep him flying.
Captain Lutz's limited abilities continued in his new job. While commanding a sightseeing tour of the Swiss Alps, he made a navigation error and ended up in Italy. He only realized his mistake when his passengers spotted road signs in Italian. In another incident, he wrecked a $1.5 million aircraft after inadvertently retracting the landing gear while the plane was still on the tarmac. Lutz's failures forced Crossair to fire him as an instructor, but they allowed him to continue flying passenger planes.
I personally do pilot assessments, and he would never have gone through my assessment with a positive recommendation.
Okay, approach course 13.
Investigators wonder why Crossair allowed Lutz to stay on as a pilot if he was not entirely competent. The answer appears to be they may have had little choice. Investigators' first glimpse into the problems at Crossair came after they found the upside-down gauge at the crash site.
We had to check if the employees had received the proper training, if they had the qualifications required for this kind of work.
No glaring maintenance issues were found, but a closer look at Crossair's hiring practices explains why Captain Lutz was allowed to keep flying. The airline may have grown too fast throughout the 80s and 90s.
La compagnie, elle s'est agrandie très rapidement.
The company expanded very rapidly, and with that success, it's clear that you have to quickly increase the staff. Office workers, mechanics, that's one thing, but pilots, you have to go out and find them.
Mais les pilotes, tu devais les trouver.
In those days, they were desperate for pilots, and somehow no decision was made to lay him off because of his questionable performance during his career.
Captain Lutz's failings caught up with him on November the 24th, 2001.
Make it go around. Go around!
24 people paid with their lives. After the accident report was issued, sweeping changes were made. Swiss aviation authorities had Crossair increase the number of employees overseeing pilots. They also scrutinized other airlines to determine if there were other substandard performers like Lutz.
One thing is for sure that the selection process has improved considerably. And of course, awareness of people's performance during their career was increased considerably.
Crossair went out of existence in 2002. It was folded into the Swiss national carrier.
As Crossair became Swiss, they adopted the previous Swissair selection process. And I can say today, which is already 9 years since, that safety has improved considerably, and also quality of the pilots that are hired by companies like Swiss.
Since the crash of Flight 3597, Zurich's runway 28 has been upgraded with both an instrument landing system and an automatic warning that alerts controllers when a plane's approach is too low. There has never been another accident involving that runway. But the Crossair tragedy and the circumstances that spawned it isn't an isolated case. Regional airlines have boomed worldwide since the 1980s, particularly in the United States, where they account for half of all flights and carry 100 million passengers a year. In the rush to fulfill consumer demand for cheap air travel, these airlines often hire less experienced pilots and pay them far lower salaries than their counterparts at major carriers. Some even neglect to test their pilots for basic skills.
There is no such thing as a compulsory pilot assessment before they get hired. Does not exist.
Colgan Air, in February of 2009, one of its planes crashed in Buffalo, New York, killing 50 people. The accident was blamed on the actions of an inexperienced crew. An eerie reminder of the Crossair disaster, it underlined the urgency of improving oversight of smaller carriers.
If you're making a product for a large company and you make a mistake, you may lose part of the market. You may lose some clients. But an airline company can lose a plane, its crew, and passengers. The stakes are very different.
Naturellement, a des causes un peu différentes.